Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution, and we have a World War III alert. We have a World War III alert, but first be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button, like, share, subscribe. We have an early show today. I have time. And we got to get into this information about Jim Crow Joe, Revolutionary Salute, putting our lives on the line, playing these dangerous games because he's bought and paid for. The small hats want us to get them out of the cement, the quicksand that they are sinking in. So let's get right to it. What exactly is going on?
Joe Biden is sending Americans to fight and die in order to protect the genocidal regime of Israel. And this is all because Israel can't stop attacking their neighbors and assassinating political leaders. Benjamin Netanyahu went to the United States and demanded that the United States defend Israel against Iran, and Joe Biden listened to him because Benjamin Netanyahu is the real president of the United States. After months of lying about how the United States and Israel wants peace, you have Israel who assassinate a lead mediator from Hamas, and now the United States is defending Israel? It was always the plan. This is Joe Biden's war with Iran. Joe Biden now doesn't have to worry about re-election, so he doesn't have to hide his genocidal intent. Over the next few months, Joe Biden is going to be extremely dangerous. The second that Joe Biden drops out of the election, he floats the idea of Americans fighting against Iran. The Democratic Party is a death cult obsessed with war and violence. Graham, in coordination with Joe Biden, just submitted a resolution to authorize the use of military force against Iran. Bro, this is about to be a disaster. If you are in the United States military and you don't get out, I'm not going to feel bad for you when you die fighting for another Israeli war.
Absolutely correct. See, the Zionists done lost their mind and done just rubber stamp Joe Biden's signature on our troops going over there to help them. But let's just look real quick at why does Israel need help? Well, first of all, the assassination of the Palestinian leader in Iran. Now, it's speculation on how did the Palestinian leader die. It's speculation a bomb was planted, could have been. Speculation of drone, speculation of missile. Let's take a little deeper look at it.
While in Tehran, Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in a heinous attack carried out by Israel. So, how did this attack happen? Due to the social media blackout imposed by Iran, we have very few clues. However, TRT World evaluated potential scenarios based on the available information. Whether it was a rocket or drone attack, we know the direction it came from. The attack might have been carried out with a mini drone or rocket launched from the hills overlooking the building. This possibility seems strong because a drone loaded with RDX explosives could achieve a low flame explosion that leaves this kind of impact. Or it might have been carried out from the north of Tehran by an aircraft carrying a longer range missile. We see that the roof on the side where the attack room is located is intact. This indicates that the rocket or drone entered directly through the window. Since there are no burn marks at the point where the building was hit, the primary suspect is the US-made RNX Hellfire missile. This weapon, which has a range of 11 kilometers, must have been fired from an aircraft to hit the building. Some Western media outlets claim that a remotely controlled explosive device was placed under Haniyeh's bed. Iranian media, on the other hand, argue that the attack was carried out using a projectile.
Absolutely. Let me get this placed up here real quick for y'all. Now we need to take a look at exactly why this is a very dangerous situation, because Iran is faced with no choice but revolutionary salute to our brother Plant-Based 15. Say great news reporting family in chat. I appreciate the donation to the war chest, brother. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the support, family. But this is very important. They want to leave this out. That you see, it's no good situation for any U.S. troops. They're not gonna go win nothing. It's gonna be all bad for them in the Middle East. They don't have the upper hand. Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal who he's facing prison. So he want to pull the U.S. into it. Why? So he want the U.S. really to guarantee his freedom. Guarantee his freedom. It's all about his freedom. And he's willing to bring us all down if he faces any prison for what he has done. That's serious business. This man is facing The Hague.
All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on Fine Print tonight. West Asia is on the edge. An angry Iran is threatening a reprisal against Israel and is reportedly planning its next course of action with its axis of resistance to avenge the assassination of the high-ranking figures in Hamas and the Hezbollah. Our next report analyzes the options that Iran is likely to take.
The assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh on Iranian soil has been particularly embarrassing for Tehran, revealing Israel's capability to strike within Iran's borders. The assassinations have intensified the urgency for Iran and its allies to respond effectively while avoiding a full-blown regional war. Iran is meeting its proxies to decide upon its next course of action. Iran's network of allied groups spans multiple countries, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hamas in Gaza, Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. Hezbollah, often considered the crown jewel of Iran's proxy network, boasts an impressive arsenal of precision rockets and drones, claiming the ability to strike any part of Israel. Hezbollah's rocket stockpile, estimated to be around 100,000, is complemented by thousands of battle-hardened fighters. Since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war, the Lebanon-based group has been launching rockets into northern Israel, maintaining pressure on multiple fronts. The scope of Iran's influence is evident in its backing of the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who have launched ballistic missiles at Israeli targets and continue to challenge U.S. naval forces in the Red Sea, disrupting crucial maritime routes. Additionally, Iran supports various militias which back the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, allegedly using Syrian territory as a conduit for weapons shipments to Hezbollah in Lebanon. In Iraq, Kataib Hezbollah, a constituent of the Islamic resistance, is Iran's biggest backer. It has been involved in several violent incidents and attacks against U.S. and coalition forces in Iraq. While Israel has been attacking Iranian proxies, its ally, U.S., is deep entrenched in West Asia with its multiple air bases. There are also 12 American warships in the region, including the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier. The Biden administration has promised support for Israel, but urges restraint from all sides.
Won't be no restraint. That's over.
The current crisis bears striking similarities to the April confrontation when Israel's strike on an Iranian consular building in Damascus, killing 2 Iranian generals, nearly sparked a full-scale war. Iran's unprecedented direct retaliation against Israel was ultimately contained through diplomatic efforts. Now, as tensions reach a fever pitch once again, the big question is, will back-channel negotiations cool tempers and prevent a wider war? Bureau Report, We On, World is One.
Aftermath of the attacks carried out by Israel this week that included the bombing of Beirut, in which they killed the Hezbollah commander, as well as the assassination of a Hamas political chief, a top Palestinian diplomat in Tehran. We are now seeing both Hezbollah and Iran vow that there will be a response. So, what is that response going to look like? What could it look like? And why is Netanyahu in a position of trying to escalate tensions in such a way that he is picking fights all around the axis of resistance, practically begging them to attack Israel? Yes, we know that the US has said that it would step in and quote unquote defend Israel. That much is clear. But is Netanyahu really willing to risk the demise of Israel in order to try to save his standing as its prime minister? Well, we discussed all that and more earlier with a special guest. So let's take a listen to that conversation now.
Not even a question.
Joining me now to discuss is Syed Mohammed Marandi, a professor of English literature at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, but I actually want to start off with getting your reaction on the latest escalations that we've seen from Israel. I mean, in a matter of hours, they bomb Beirut and kill a Hezbollah commander there. And then they assassinate a Palestinian diplomat, Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Were you surprised to see Netanyahu's government pursue these escalations at this time?
No, I was expecting escalation. I didn't know what form it would take, but I've been of the belief for the last few weeks that the Israeli regime can't continue the war as it is, and they're not willing to have a ceasefire. So the only thing left would be escalation. And as you pointed out, the attack on Beirut, where they bombed a residential complex, and the assassination in Tehran, as well as the bombing of a civilian target in Yemen, in Al Hodeidah, were all carried out in order to bring about escalation. And now here we are. There has been escalation. There will be a very harsh response from the collective axis, but the axis of resistance, but the Iranian response will be particularly harsh, and I think it will go beyond what we saw after the Israeli regime bombed the Iranian consulate building in Damascus.
Yeah, and I know that there's been a lot of comparisons drawn to what we saw back in April, where you had that initial Israeli attack, you had the Iranian response. And even now, I mean, we're seeing Israel claiming, oh, well, anyone who targets us, there will be a harsh response from us, as if they were not responsible for the initial attacks, which are now calling for retaliation. And as you pointed out there, it's not as if they just carried out one attack, right? They just targeted Hezbollah or they just targeted Hamas. No, you're talking about seem to be wanting to target the axis of resistance as a whole, almost begging for some sort of a response. And we heard from the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, earlier today. He said that Israel has crossed red lines and that the conflict has entered a new phase unlike the previous one. What do you think he means by that?
It's quite clear that the response to the outrages, whether in Beirut or in Tehran or in Yemen, will be very severe. And Iran is determined to make sure that the Israeli regime regrets the terror attack in Tehran. Not only did they violate Iran's sovereignty, but they murdered an Iranian guest and the representative of the Palestinian people. So they will strike Israel very hard. And I think it's very clear that just as the Israeli regime has already lost the war, they've lost on the border with Lebanon, they've lost in Gaza, and they've lost in the Red Sea, where the Americans have been fighting on their behalf, but to no avail. They've lost on all fronts. They've lost in Syria and Iraq.
Yeah, they're dangerous now.
Netanyahu is not acting in the interests of the regime. He's acting for his own interests.
Self-preservation.
And that's why he's bringing about he's brought about this escalation. Netanyahu is doing it to preserve his own power, and he's sacrificing the Israeli regime for his own sake, for his own selfish interests. So I think it's very clear that what we will be seeing in the coming days will be very painful to Israel. And
Yeah.
they will be on the losing end. And many people will ask themselves, why then did Israel carry out this attack?
See, once the International Criminal Court, once he was indicted as a war criminal, he was trapped. He can't stay in Israel because he's losing the war. The people don't want him. So he got to make a deal with the U.S. The U.S. ain't putting no deal on no citizenship on the table yet. So he acting out. He acting erratic. He going crazy. Unlike Putin, who's safe in Russia, can go wherever he wants because he'll boss. Netanyahu is not in that position. So he'll bring the whole world down before he ever go to The Hague as a war criminal.
The reason is that this is not being carried out for the sake of Israel. The escalation has been brought about for the sake of Netanyahu.
That's a great point, and I think something that, right, it defies logic in a way. You look at Netanyahu and you think, why would you, further put Israel in this position where now it is going to be targeted and attacked just to save yourself, right? How does that benefit you? But of course, he doesn't necessarily need logic, as we've seen with everything that he's done up until this point. But speaking about what Iran may do and what Iran could do, I know that they're warning that there will be a response. What do you think that will look like? Is it likely that it'll be kind of similar to April when it comes to the timing? We see a little bit of time pass before there is a response. And what is at stake this time around?
I don't know how long it will take for the response to be carried out. I think it will be much more extensive and hard hitting than what we saw after the strike on the consulate. And I think also Hezbollah will respond, and Yemen will respond, and so will the resistance in Iraq and Syria respond. So the Israelis are going to be hammered on multiple fronts, but obviously the Iranians are going to hit the hardest. Now, as I said earlier, Netanyahu is like a gambler. First, he gambles with his money, then he runs out of money. He gambles his what he has at home, and then he has to ultimately he's going to have to, give up the house. Israel is being pushed towards destruction. I don't mean that it will collapse tomorrow or next week or 6 months from now, but after losing the war and after being discredited across the world, because the world sees the Israeli regime as genocidal, it sees how they're raping prisoners and how they're massacring children and women day and night. So it has no credibility. It has lost the battle on the battlefield. But by expanding the war, Israel will bring devastation upon itself. And that will mean that in future, Israelis in increasing numbers will leave, and no one will again invest in Israel because foreign investors will see that nowhere in the country.
They're already leaving in droves, packs. They flooding the airports. They don't want to be there. They dual citizens. They got multiple passports.
Is safe. So Israel has sealed its own fate through the actions of Netanyahu. Such a regime is no longer sustainable in the long term. So Iran's response will be decisive, and the response of the collective axis of resistance will be decisive. But I think, implications will be very long term for the regime. And also, many will ask, well, what happens after escalation? We already have escalation. The Israelis have assured, have made that they've brought about that escalation. We are in a state of escalation now. The question is, what happens after the regime in Tel Aviv is punished? That is a question that people have to ask the Americans. If they rein in their dog in Tel Aviv, if they yank on the leash, then we will not see a regional war. If the Americans do the stupid thing,
They don't control
and they get involved, they will lose everything in the region. They will be expelled from Iraq. Their bases in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. And those regimes that gave those bases to the United States, they will be destroyed too, because they'll be seen as hostile. So if the Americans get involved in a regional war, then they're gone. It's over for them.
Yeah,
No
and
one in the region wants, and I should stress, none of us want a regional war. No one wants a regional war, because it will create misery across the world. It will bring about the collapse of the global economy, and the consequences will be beyond my comprehension. It's just beyond my imagination. However, the Israeli regime will be severely punished for what it has done over the last few days. There's no doubt about that. And Iran is not going to hold back. Iran is going to hit the regime hard. So everything depends on what the Americans do after the retaliation that comes from Tehran and the other members of the resistance alliance.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring up the US and kind of the role that they play in all of this because, given the fact that we are 10 months now, almost 10 months into Israel's ongoing bombardment and blockade of the Gaza Strip, their genocidal war against the Palestinian people there, the question always becomes, why hasn't the US stepped in and done more, right? Why hasn't the US forced Israel to stop? Why have they continued to provide the bombs? And even in a situation like this, where you have Israel carrying out all of these attacks, provoking multiple members of the axis of resistance, and yet you look to the US and our defense secretary here is saying, oh, well, the US will make sure that we help Israel to defend itself. And it's like, it's not about self defense when you're the one carrying out all of these different attacks. And even on that note, I mean, here in the US, our current president has said he's not going to run again. Clearly, he's not in charge of US foreign policy at all. But the top two candidates, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, have made it clear that they are so supportive of Israel that is above and beyond anything else. So what are your concerns there when you see the way that the US is acting right now? And it doesn't seem as though it's going to try to rein Netanyahu in, especially after last week's visit, his trip to DC, where he got just a nauseating amount of applause and celebration by the US Congress.
Told him he was going to go crazy.
The United States is destroying itself. This is a choice that they've made. The United States has revealed itself to the world that it is a barbaric and genocidal regime.
The Fourth Reich.
They are just as guilty of genocide as the Israelis are, and mainstream Western journalists, Western politicians, Western elites, Western diplomats, they are all foot soldiers for genocide. They're all in this together. And the world sees this. The whole of the global South sees this. Even in the West, increasingly, despite Western mainstream media, young people are seeing the reality of the West. So what we saw in Congress was, I think, the greatest catastrophe possible for the United States, because the world watched them applaud a genocidal child killer, a person who allows prisoners to be raped in prison, a person who carries out terrorist acts in multiple countries. So the United States is on the decline, but today it no longer has any soft power whatsoever. And it's fighting on multiple fronts in Ukraine. It's increasing tensions with China. This is not sustainable. And ultimately, I think the United States, economically and politically, it has already been on the decline. But when it comes to human values and the image of the United States, the United States has been utterly destroyed. And the reason for all this is because Zionists are in charge. Whether it's Christian Zionists or Jewish Zionists or secular Zionists, doesn't matter. They're the ones who are destroying the United States. They're the ones in charge of what's going on in the United States and in Israel. They can be in the United States, they can be in Israel, they can be in Europe, wherever they are, they're the ones responsible. And they, of course, do not reflect Christianity. They don't reflect Jewish values. They don't, just as ISIS did not reflect Muslim values, but they are the ones who are destroying the United States. So the United States is being destroyed. Its image has already been destroyed, but the United States is being destroyed because of elements within the political establishment, because of wealthy donors, because of Zionism, because of the military-industrial complex. All of these combined are bringing down the United States and the empire in a very extraordinarily and fast way, something that we've never seen in history before. Usually empires take decades to fall, or centuries maybe to fall. But in the case of the United States, really, since the war in Iraq, I think the collapse of the empire has just been moving faster and faster.
Yeah, it's shocking to watch. And I think even just in the aftermath of this so-called war on terror that the US launched, and, we look back at Iraq and Afghanistan, and you think surely the US would learn from those. I guess you could call them failures. I don't know if they achieved what they necessarily wanted to achieve. They certainly didn't win any wars, right? There were no victories. And you watch the US now stirring up tensions with Russia and China and Iran. And meanwhile, all three of those countries are working together as they should. And the US acts as though these are all of these isolated conflicts, not realizing that when we're talking about a growing multipolar world, it's because of US foreign policy, because they have been the bully for so long that you have other countries in the world going, we can't continue to survive like this. I mean, if the US was able to, whether it was Iran or Russia or one of these other countries that it has tried to target, if it was truly successful, then that harms everyone else in the world. Now, when it comes to where Iran stands, I also wanted to ask you about that, because I know that Iran has a new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who was just inaugurated this week. And when it came to, what he had to say about the West, it seemed like he wanted the sanctions lifted, right? He wanted there to be more peace, at least from what I took from what I heard on the Western media of what they said about him. But how do you view him, and especially the timing of all of this, right? You have someone that comes in and suddenly he's dealing with all of these tensions with the first day on the job.
Well, nothing really has changed. No one in Iran wants sanctions, but it's the United States that has to change its policies. That's what President Pezeshkian has said. I find, from his public statements, I find his foreign policy to be identical, actually, to that of former President Raisi's. Because President Raisi's policy was to expand relations with the global South, with neighbors, and to join organizations such as BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and to explore opportunities to ease tensions with the West. And this is exactly what President Pezeshkian has been saying as well. When it comes to negotiations with the West, he did say very clearly that the West has to change its attitude. It has to change its behavior. Otherwise, we have other options. And that's exactly what President Raisi was saying as well. So I don't see any change taking place in Iran, but Iran is giving the opportunity to the West to change its behavior. Also, President Pezeshkian made a very strong speech during his inauguration ceremony in support of Palestine. And I think many people saw it. And the martyr of the Hamas movement, Mr. Haniyeh, he was in the audience, and he hugged the president after the speech. So Ismail Haniyeh spent his that he was with the president before he was martyred, and that made the president particularly angry, the fact that he was martyred. Just today, after the funeral ceremony for martyr HERE, a reporter went up to the president and asked him how he feels, and he says, "I can't talk now." He was very emotional. So if the Americans think that Iran's policy towards Palestine is going to change, they're mistaken. If they think that Iran is going to give concessions over its legitimate and peaceful nuclear program, they're mistaken again. The only way forward for the Americans and the Europeans is to change policy towards Iran, but also to change policy towards the Palestinian people. The West has the elites in the West, the political establishment in the West has to recognize that Palestinians are human beings. So far, they don't accept that. They consider Palestinians to be subhuman. Otherwise, they wouldn't be supporting an ethno-supremacist regime that's carrying out a Holocaust. Once they consider Palestinians to be human beings, and once they recognize the rights of the Iranian people, then there can be change in the relationship.
Yeah, I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Syed Mohammad Marandi, professor of English literature at the University of Tehran, thank you so much for your time and
Thank you for
insight.
having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe.
Professor, thank you very much for joining you. I missed you. 2 quiet weeks while I was away, being sarcastic, of course, but thank you for joining us. Among the events that took place during our 2-week hiatus was Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to the U.S. Congress, and it was as advertised. There were 58 standing ovations and a 55-minute speech. What is the geopolitical significance of Netanyahu's rapturous reception by Congress?
Well, I think that most people around the world were not surprised by what happened. This isn't the first time he appeared before Congress and was treated like royalty. I mean, this has happened before. And most people around the world understand full well that basically the Israel lobby owns Congress and they can pretty much get anything they want. So it's not surprising in that sense. But the fact is that it further embarrasses the United States. It makes us look like the world's greatest hypocrites. We are always talking about international law, a rules-based system, and so forth and so on, the importance of human rights. And here you have a war criminal. He is a war criminal. He is a leader who is in charge of a genocidal campaign in Gaza, who is being wildly cheered by most of Congress. And this just does enormous damage to America's reputation. And it will be a stain on our reputation for the foreseeable future, as it should be.
What turned my stomach was my own conclusion that those people standing for him, they don't represent me. They don't represent the American people. They represent the donor class that got them elected. Very few had the courage not to go. Congressman Thomas Massie, a longtime friend of mine, the only Republican, and maybe about 100 Democrats, although many of those Democrats that didn't show, like Kamala Harris, for example, voted for and supported all the appropriations to Israel. They just didn't want to be seen in the same room with the war criminal.
Well, I'll give those people who didn't go credit for not being there. You're absolutely right that normally they would support Israel hook, line, and sinker when it comes to the funds and weapons that they need. to kill Palestinians in Gaza. But nevertheless, the fact they didn't appear when Netanyahu appeared on Capitol Hill is a minor victory, and I feel good about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Were you surprised that he was so bellicose, that he offered no peace plan? In fact, he didn't mention peace or the concept of peace at all.
No, I was not surprised that he was so bellicose. I also was not surprised that he told a handful of lies, bold-faced lies, which of course Congress just lapped up. It's very important to understand on your point about the peace plan.
Right.
What's going on here is that we in the United States, or we in the West, are hoping that he will come up with some sort of agreement to go along with a ceasefire, and then some sort of agreement to go along with working out a viable political solution for dealing with Gaza over the long term. He, of course, has no interest in doing either one of those things. It's just very important to understand that. Basically, what he is interested in doing is ethnically cleansing Gaza. He wants to drive all of the Palestinians out. He's not interested in the ceasefire. He wants to do everything he can to make Gaza Palestinian free.
Well, he just presided over the murder of the chief negotiator on the other side, and of the team, there's the fellow they killed, and of the team of negotiators, he was the most moderate, pushing for the ceasefire most aggressively, and they executed him.
Yes, I mean, this is just a way of not putting Netanyahu or the Israelis more generally in a situation where they have to maneuver to kill any meaningful negotiations for ceasefire. If you kill Haniyeh the way they did, you can say that that is why we're not having any peace negotiations.
But how can you be taken seriously at the negotiating table when you murder somebody on the other side of the table? I realize he wasn't literally on the other side of the table, but he was calling the shots.
They're not interested in being taken seriously at the negotiating table. They're not interested in going to the negotiating table. As I said, their basic goal is to cleanse Gaza.
All right, then they have been duping, and maybe it's easy to do, Joe Biden and Tony Blinken since October.
This is no surprise to you, I hope, right? Of course, that's what they're doing. And Biden and Blinken are not very sophisticated when it comes to thinking about Israel. One could argue they're not very sophisticated about international politics in general. But with regard to Israel and with regard to what Netanyahu is doing, it's very clear that Netanyahu is in charge, and he manipulates Biden and Blinken as he sees fit, and they go along with it with a smile on their face.
Here's the Algerian ambassador to the United Nations at the Security Council. You'll see the Israeli ambassador, rather than politely listen, pull the earplug of the translation out of his ear. I've never seen that before, but maybe that's what happens at the Security Council. Cut number 14, Chris.
We are on the precipice of a catastrophe. This morning, Israel committed an act of terror by assassinating Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, violating international law, violating the sovereignty of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Everything he said was truthful and documented, correct?
Correct.
And the Israelis don't even want to talk about it. Add to that, before we get to where this is going, the killing of a Hezbollah commander in Beirut under the pretext, if you can believe this, if they expect people to believe this, that he killed fellow Arabs who were playing soccer in the Golan Heights. It's inconceivable to me that the Hezbollah would do that, but that was the excuse for blowing him away in Beirut. How many more of these staged assassinations can these in foreign countries of people who are not engaged in violence can the Israelis get away with before this blows up?
Many, many more, because the United States protects them at every turn. And the United States has accomplices in Western Europe. So there's nothing to stop the Israelis here. What people have to understand is the power of the Israel lobby. And you saw this clearly when Benjamin Netanyahu came to Capitol Hill on July 24th, right? That's the Israel lobby at work, or what you like to call the donor class at work. And we protect Israel no matter what. So they can start wars, they can do pretty much anything. And the United States will protect them. And indeed, it's quite clear that we will not only protect them, we will arm them. I don't know what more to say.
What will happen? What will happen if Hezbollah attacks in a very forceful way? There's Kamala Harris. She obviously didn't have a problem shaking his hand in front of the cameras there. She just didn't want to do it in the Congress. But what happens if they ramp up the violence with Hezbollah and Iran gets involved?
This will not be good for us, and it will not be good for Israel. What you want to understand here, and I think this is something that most Americans don't understand.
Please explain.
Israel is in really deep trouble, right? It's in really deep trouble today. And more importantly, it has no way out. They were unable to defeat Hamas in Gaza, number one. Number two, they're stuck in Gaza, right? They're not getting out. And you remember they left in 2005 because it was a hornet's nest. They're back in there.
Right.
Number three, they have no meaningful military solution against Hezbollah. They cannot defeat Hezbollah. And with regard to Iran, even if they get into a war with Iran and they launch lots of missiles and rockets and aerial attacks at Iran and do a lot of destruction, Iran will still be there. And Iran, by the way, is on the road to acquiring nuclear weapons. So they have all of those external problems. Then they have these wicked internal problems, which we saw on display earlier this week surrounding these 9 reservists who were arrested for gang raping a Palestinian prisoner. And by the way, that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the horrors that the Israelis have been inflicting on the Palestinians. But anyway, these 9 reservists who engaged in this gang rape were arrested. And the end result is that ultra-rightists broke in to 2 different army bases to reverse this arrest. And if you look at the performance of the police and you look at the performance of the reservists in the IDF, some of whom joined with the protesters, you see that the Israelis run the real risk down the road of a civil war. Then finally, you want to understand that what's on display these days is manifest evidence that Israel is heavily dependent on the United States. They cannot fight these wars. They cannot continue like this without American support. We have given them $18 billion in 2024. Just think about that, $18 billion. And we help them in their military fight with Iran on April 14th. We are giving them all sorts of weaponry. They need us. They need us to provide diplomatic support. So this is not quite the independent country that Israel likes to think of itself as. It is heavily dependent on the United States. So when you take all of these factors into account, you then ask yourself the question, how can they get out of this? Attack Hezbollah in Lebanon? Are we serious? They did this in 1982. They did it in 2006. It was a disaster. Their army is worn out from what's happened in Gaza, where they haven't beaten Hamas. They would be insane to invade Lebanon, even if we were to help them. So how do they fix that problem? How do they fix the problem in Gaza? All of these problems are unfixable. They are in trouble and they are digging deeper.
And the reason they're digging deeper, and the reason these problems keep getting exacerbated every day, in my view, can be stated in one word: Netanyahu.
Again, you don't want to blame it all on Netanyahu, and you want to remember that there are people to the right of him inside of Israel. He is basically a centrist. He is not, an arch right winger. There's no left to speak of in Israel. There's sort of a center and a far right and a right. And Netanyahu, you can put him in the center or on the right. He's not on the far right, but there are people to the right of him. And if Netanyahu were to go away tomorrow, the basic problem that I described would not change. Also, I would note to you that you cannot underestimate the responsibility that the donor class has for causing this problem, or causing this set of problems that Israel faces, and perpetuating those problems. The donor class makes it almost impossible for the United States to put any pressure on Israel to act in smarter ways. The government of the United States, for all its faults, has understood for a long time that Israel is pursuing suicidal policies, especially with regard to the occupation. But we cannot put any pressure on Israel simply because of the donor class. So you want to remember that as Israel is digging deeper and deeper and deeper, it is getting more and more support from the donor class than ever.
When the right-wingers broke into the prison, did they successfully extract the 9 IDF prisoners, or are they still incarcerated for the horrific crimes that they committed?
No, they're still incarcerated. They broke into the first base, at which point the Israelis moved the prisoners to a different base north of Tel Aviv, and then the protesters broke into that base. But by that point in time, the security forces inside of Israel had forcefully moved to shut down the protests, and therefore the prisoners remain in jail.
And after that first break-in, the Knesset actually debated in immunity for IDF members who abuse and torture Palestinians. And at the same time they debated that, they debated whether or not it should be lawful to put a bullet between the eyes of Palestinian prisoners, uncharged, unprosecuted, unconvicted, because they need bed space, they need room in their jails. What kind of a democracy has debates like that?
Well, the question I would ask you is why do they even need to have these debates? They just do this as a matter of course. This is the way the Israelis act. All you have to do is look at the history of Israeli-Palestinian relations and what happens in Israeli prisons to understand that this is commonplace behavior.
I would guess the debate was because they wanted to satisfy the right. If this passed, and it was proposed by the Likud, by Netanyahu's coalition, so it presumably will pass when there's a vote. But if it passes, then those 9 guys are set free.
Well, are you going to be surprised if that happens?
No, I'm not going to be surprised, but my stomach is going to be turned that things like that happen under our eyes, and still we give them money. Is there anything the Israeli government could do that would cause the American government to say enough is enough?
Not that I can think of. I hope I'm wrong, but
or would it take a President Max Blumenthal before something like that is going to happen?
Well, it would be very nice if Max was elected president and he could override Congress at every turn and then execute a more rational policy toward Israel. But as you and I both know, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But I just want to say one other thing on this, Judge. It is important to understand that Israel's reputation does matter. It's hard to say exactly how it matters at this point, but Israel is doing enormous damage to its reputation inside the United States and outside of the United States, around the world. We live in the age of instant information. Everything that happens inside of Israel is almost everything of any consequence is filmed, and those videos that result are sent around the world. There are stories on the front pages of newspapers and so forth and so on. So people are well aware of what's going on here. And this, by the way, is why you have this real disjuncture between public opinion in the United States and how Congress acts towards Israel. Right? The lobby is able to basically use its leverage on policymakers or politicians to get what it wants, but it's having a devil of a time controlling the discourse because it's so obvious to people what Israel is doing. And as is the case with you, I believe it's repulsive to huge numbers of Americans and huge numbers of other people outside of the United States.
Does the United States have any credibility in the international diplomatic community?
Well, it has some, but it's diminishing for sure. And when you look,
Why is it diminishing? Because of the obsequious behavior towards Israel?
yes, and in good part because of how we have reacted to the efforts of the ICJ and the ICC to hold Israel accountable for its behavior. I think for most people around the world, the ICC and the ICJ are held in very high regard. Lots of people around the world really care about international law, and they expect the United States, which helped create this rule-based order, to obey the rules and to get countries like Israel to obey those rules as well. And when that doesn't happen, it does significant damage to our reputation.
Switching gears, Professor Mearsheimer, what is the significance of Russian and Chinese fighter jets right off the coast? There they are, by the way, right off the coast of Alaska.
Well, basically, the Russians and the Chinese are telling the Americans, we can do to you what you do to us. The Americans fly aircraft and maneuver ships up and down the Chinese coastline. And of course, if you think about what's happening with regard to NATO expansion, in particular, what's happening inside of Ukraine, you basically see the United States thinks that it can get right up into Russia's face. And the Russians tell us they don't like this, and we say, too bad. Well, the Russians are retaliating by saying we can play the same game that you're playing. And you saw this, by the way, a few weeks back when the Russians sent a submarine and some other ships off the coast of Florida to visit Cuba.
Are there nuclear or are there submarines capable of firing nuclear weapons off the Atlantic coast of the United States, which could reach Atlanta or Washington or Boston or New York?
I don't know whether they're there now, but there's no question that the Russians have submarines armed with nuclear weapons that can hit the United States. There's just no question about that. And the same thing is true with regard to the United States. We have submarines that can hit China or can hit the United States very quickly.
If the Hezbollah Israeli conflagration gets out of control and Iran enters and Turkey enters, would Russia enter?
I think the Russians would be very reluctant to enter, but their hand could be forced. I mean, if the Turks were to come in, they'd have to come through Syria. And the Russians are present in Syria in rather significant numbers. And if the United States and the Israelis started bombing Turkish forces in
Syria,
I mean, not only would that involve Syria, it might involve the Russians. And by the way, if you talk about that scenario, you want to remember that Turkey is a member of NATO.
You're reading my mind. So what happens then? A NATO member has been attacked under Article 5 by another NATO member, the United States of America, the creator of NATO.
You tell me. I have no idea.
I have no idea either.
But if I can,
what would happen?
This is why I believe, do not want this war to escalate. Here I'm talking about the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. We do not want it to escalate because we can see all these possible ways that that war plays itself out that would be disastrous for the United States. But what I find amazing about American foreign policymakers' behavior on this issue is how foolish it is. And you're saying to yourself, what does he mean? The Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, has said that if Israel gets into a war with Hezbollah, the United States will come to Israel's defense. This is not something you want to say if you're trying to cool the Israelis' jets. You want to basically convey to the Israelis that they're on their own and you're not going to bail them out this time because that greatly reduces their incentive to start a war. But Austin tells them, and here we're talking about the Israelis, that if they get into a fight with Hezbollah, we will come to their aid. This just makes it more likely. I'm not saying it means that it will happen, but it makes it more likely that the Israelis will pick a fight with Hezbollah, and then we'll go down the roads that you were describing before, the possible roads where the Turks might come in, the Russians might come in, and so forth and so on. So you just see here again how foolish American foreign policy is.
But that aid would likely come from the sea or the sky. We're not going to send Marines into the Golan Heights or into the West Bank or into northern Israel, are we?
No, I don't think so. I think that's extremely unlikely. But to go back to the scenarios that you were positing, what if the Turks come in? What if the Russians come in? What if the Iranians come in? Then all bets are off. I mean, who knows exactly how this would play out? The thing you want to remember here is that we live in a world of radical uncertainty. You and I can posit all sorts of scenarios that might occur if the Israelis and Hezbollah get into a full-scale fight, but we can't be sure which one will occur. And you can posit some really dangerous scenarios from an American point of view and not rule them out of court. And this, of course, is why we should be doing everything we can to make sure that such a war doesn't start.
Chris, do we still have the clip of President Erdogan? Yes. Okay. So, Professor Mearsheimer, here's President Erdogan in his own way threatening Israel. Tell me what you think of this.
What was our import-export ratio in the defense industry? Where have we come to? But my dear brothers and sisters, let none of these fool us or should deceive us. We must be very strong so that this Israel cannot do these ridiculous things to Palestine. Just as we entered Karabakh, just as we entered Libya, we will do the same to them. There is no reason for us not to. We only have to be strong so that we can take these steps.
This is not the first time he's been harshly critical of the Israeli government, but now he says there's no reason not to enter Israel. Is he a blowhard or is this a serious threat?
Well, who knows for sure? I mean, he's committed himself publicly to doing this. So he will pay a certain price if he backs off. And as you know, sometimes you get into situations where you're boxed in, where you really have no choice. And he may feel that he has to do something to back up those words. It may be the case that he is a blowhard, and in the event, he's afraid to do anything of any consequence. But then again, that might not be true. We don't know for sure. But again, you just see more evidence of the fact that we are out on a slippery slope. And if we're not careful, we could slide into a major war, we meaning the United States in the Middle East, which is the last thing we need at this point in time.
Transitioning just for a moment over to Ukraine, It seems from all of your colleagues who are on the show and everything that I've been able to see that things are getting worse and worse for Ukraine, and Russia's march westward is inexorable and unstoppable. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I think if you look at the mainstream media, it's beginning to catch up with that line of argument.
Right.
I think that the mainstream media understands now that the Russians are clobbering the Ukrainians. And more importantly, that the Ukrainians have no way of rectifying the problem, or to put it in more general terms, the Ukrainians plus the West together have no way of rectifying the problem. So what's going to happen here is it's only going to get worse. We just can't tell a story as to how Ukraine fixes this problem and stems the bleeding, or even reverses the tide, which is what a lot of people talk about. It's just not going to happen. The Ukrainians are in deep trouble, and finally, the mainstream media is catching up with that story.
Do you think maybe there's some negotiations going on that we don't know about through intermediaries? Just as we woke up this morning and found out that the Turks had negotiated this enormous prisoner swap that involved 9 different countries, but 2 people that were very much in focus on the part of the American public, Whelan and Gershkovich, and one person very much the focus, I forget his name, the professional killer in Germany, on the focus of the Russians.
Well, I think there is a possibility that negotiations are taking place in the back channel. I think a lot of Americans are hopeful that once those negotiations get started, they will quickly lead to a resolution of this war in Ukraine. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that unless the Ukrainian military completely collapses on the battlefield, it is going to be extremely difficult to get any sort of agreement. And that is due in large part to the fact that the Russians are making extreme demands, as they should, from my point of view. They're making extreme demands, and those are demands that the Ukrainians and the West, or the Americans mainly, will be unwilling to accept. So I just don't see how you can find the actual ingredients that are necessary for a meaningful peace agreement.
Where's the woman that started all this? Where's Victoria Nuland today?
Well,
she's teaching at Columbia University with her friend Hillary Clinton, although they're probably on summer break, just like the University of Chicago.
But I would not blame Victoria Nuland. The person who really started this was George W. Bush. And you could even make the argument that the person who started it was Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is the president who started NATO expansion and basically made it clear that we had an open door policy on NATO expansion. George W. Bush in April 2008, of course, was the president who said that Ukraine was going to become part of NATO. But every president since George W. Bush has doubled down on our effort to bring Ukraine into NATO.
Who is it that promised Gorbachev that NATO would never move 1 inch eastward? That must have been Jim Baker under George H.W. Bush. Am I right?
That's correct.
And that's before Bill Clinton.
That's before Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton came to office, there was no commitment to expand NATO. And he made the initial decision. I believe it was made in 1994. And Clinton, of course, came into power in January of 1993. And shortly after he came into power, we began to debate the whole question of what to do with Eastern Europe. And at first, people talked about the Partnership for Peace, which was something the Russians could easily live with. But then we began to talk seriously about NATO expansion. And it's very important to understand that in the 1990s in the United States, there was a huge debate between people who favored NATO expansion, and this, of course, includes President Clinton himself, and those who were opposed to NATO expansion. And those people who were opposed basically said that someday this is going to blow up in our face, and the Russians are going to react, and we're going to have a major conflict in Eastern Europe that's not going to be good. And they, of course, proved right. But they lost the debate in the 90s. And the point that I made to you is after the 90s were over, after Bill Clinton left office, right, and George W. Bush came into power in his last year in office, 2008, that's when he decided that he wanted to cap off his presidency with a feather in his cap. And that feather in his cap was going to be NATO expansion into Ukraine. And of course, that is the principal decision that led to the disaster today. Although you don't want to lose sight of the fact that President Obama, President Trump, President Biden have all doubled down on President George W. Bush's April 2008 decision.
Right. Professor Mearsheimer, thank you very much. Thank you for the recitation of a forgotten
also serving as a reminder that we are watching Netanyahu ramp up tensions in the region. He is pushing Hezbollah, Iran, Yemen, all to a place where they are being forced to respond after the axis of resistance as a whole has made it clear that they do not want a regional war. All they want is for Israel to put an end to its ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. And as we're seeing, Israel is just refusing to move forward with a simple ceasefire as Hamas has presented proposal after proposal. Instead, Netanyahu seems to want a much wider war to take away from the complete failure of his to eliminate Hamas in Gaza. And yet, as all of this is happening, we have to wonder just how much of this was given the green light when Netanyahu made his glory trip to the US last week. And what are we in for when it comes to the response that we do get from the resistance? Well, we discussed all of that and more with a special guest earlier. So let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Dr. Ramzy Baroud, a Palestinian-American journalist, author, and editor of the Palestine Chronicle. Dr. Baroud, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that there has been a lot happening over the last 24 hours, but one of the most recent updates is that Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh has been killed in the Iranian capital of Tehran, with Iran's Revolutionary Guard saying he was targeted at his residence while visiting Iran to attend the inauguration of the nation's new president. Now, this is really a shocking attack. I know that Israel hasn't commented on it. The assumption is that Israel was behind it, but what was your reaction when you heard this news?
Honestly, it took me by surprise, and I know it sounds strange to say that anything that Israel does these days takes anyone by surprise, but this particular one did. Because Ismail Haniyeh is not a military leader, does not make decisions regarding war or resistance or releasing captives or holding them. He is essentially he is a diplomat, and he has been quite a good one, despite the fact that his roots, and his career not really been centered in diplomacy. Did not receive any academic training in the field. He was a simple teacher in a refugee camp in Gaza that kind of rose in ranks, became the dean of a university in Gaza, and kind of went directly into politics after the elections of 2006. And he kind of learned on the job in a sense. In fact, I do remember back in the day that many have kind of belittled him. That this is a preacher in a mosque, in a local mosque, a refugee who continued to live in his same house in the refugee camp where his family were expelled, or to which his family were expelled many years ago. He continued to live in that refugee camp, living the same simple life that he did before he became the prime minister of Palestine. But he was not really taken serious by anyone. Yet, in a sense, he kind of proved everyone wrong. And to see that he was really the main engineer behind the Beijing declarations, for example, getting China to be one of the main mediators in the factional divides among Palestinians, and to actually have that effort culminate to the Beijing Declaration. I think it was in July 23. They're just few days before he was killed, like a week before he was killed, shows that the massive transformation in Ismail Haniyeh's character. And I think in many ways that was extremely upsetting for Israel. But why kill a diplomat? Why kill a politician? And that's really the big question. And that's why I said it took me by surprise, in the sense that it seems that Israel has failed to locate any kind of Hamas individuals that could, eliminate in Israel's lexicon in Gaza. They completely failed. 10 months of a relentless genocide in Gaza, and they couldn't really achieve anything of value as far as killing Palestinian leaders on the ground. And the last failed attempt was in Khan Yunis a few weeks ago, when they killed and wounded literally hundreds of Palestinian refugees in a displacement camp in the Mawasi area near Khan Yunis, saying, well, we were targeting Muhammad al-Daif and it seems that we have missed him, and that sort of thing. I don't think Muhammad al-Daif was even there in the first place. But in any case, it just shows how pathetic the Israeli military efforts have become. But to go after Ismail Haniyeh within a diplomatic atmosphere, I mean, we are talking about the inauguration of the Iranian president, delegations from all over the world, mainly from the global south. It was almost like a diplomatic party. The degree of boldness, the degree of complete carelessness about international protocol, let alone international law and customs, shows that Israel has reached the absolute point of madness in its war against the Palestinians, which challenges everyone involved. I mean, I think Iran, Hezbollah, and everybody, they have possibly the greatest challenge they have faced since the last 10 months.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I appreciate the background on Hania, because I feel like that's something that's getting missed by a lot of this media coverage. And there seems to be this trend, and I would say that it is very intentional, especially here in the West, to kind of conflate anything Hamas related in to being just the military wing, right? They don't talk about the political wing, they don't talk about anything else related to Hamas. And so to talk about this assassination and to not pay attention to the fact that this was a diplomat, this was a political chief, he was not involved with the military. And exactly as you pointed out there, I mean, if Israel is turning to this level, then it seems like almost this desperate attempt to turn the attention away from the fact that they have not eliminated Hamas in Gaza. They haven't gotten close. They've looked incredibly ridiculous every time that they reinvade a new area in which they previously claimed that Hamas was eliminated from it. And for this to happen in Tehran, I feel like is no coincidence, right? It is very much sending that message that, as Netanyahu has tried, I know he was just in the United States last week and got a sickening amount of support from the US Congress. But how do you view, I guess, what Netanyahu's goal is here? Because obviously he's targeting a diplomat, but yes, he's also targeting him in Tehran and rising those tensions all around.
Well, if we are to think about this from, like everyday diplomacy in the Middle East prior to Netanyahu, let's marginalize Netanyahu here for a minute and think about this. There's a new Iranian president. We have been told that he's a reformer, that he is keenly interested in ending the sanctions on Iraq, and he is open to dialogue. The political discourse in the Middle East, various newspapers and TV programs have been talking about what should the Iranian president expect. So does he want a Trump or a Kamala Harris in office? That's kind of type of diplomacy, kind of quite a rational kind of discussion. What is beneficial, what's not beneficial. The man hasn't, as of yet, fully articulated a political discourse. I mean, he hasn't even made introductions to himself, neither to the region nor internationally, aside from a few tweets and few statements here and there. You come on the day, and so that's rational diplomacy. So what do you do in a situation like this? You just wait. You wait until your enemy or your rival develops a political position. Then you kind of start staking your claims. You start attacking or agreeing, finding the common ground. What Netanyahu has done, and this is really the degree of unprecedented madness of Netanyahu and his government, is just before we even met this new president, before we even familiarize ourselves with how to pronounce his last name, you come and you attack a delegation that is coming to attend the inauguration of the president. And diplomats are all around. Some of the diplomats were in the same building, and others were all around the area. You come and you kill him right there. And you are sending a message to Iran. I'm trying to provoke you, to the president. I have no patience of you being a reformer. I am expecting hardline politics from Iran because I want a regional war with Iran. I don't want any space for diplomacy, for common grounds. I don't expect you to say anything that could be favorable to whomever is going to be the next president of the United States. That so maybe the Americans will find common ground with Iran, reactivate the Iran nuclear act. None of this. Within hours, I will come and I will declare that I will push you to the corner where you have no other option but to retaliate. And they have to retaliate. First of all, this is a humiliation for Iran to come and if you are familiar with Persian and Arab cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, the hospitality and the protection of their guests is very, very essential, is a pillar of these cultures. This is why in the various statements made today by Khamenei and by others within the Iranian government, they spoke about the guest. You killed our guest in our own home. If we were gonna forgive or let go or navigate this in a diplomatic way because of our strategic interest, we can't do it when you come and kill our guests. And I think Netanyahu knows that very well. I mean, Israel has been in the Middle East for 75, 76 years.
Iran.
They know very well how Iranian cultures operate. So now Iran has to retaliate. And by the way, there is still the retaliation of Hezbollah for the attack on one of their leaders yesterday. We don't know the fate of that leader, but still, that is something in the works. Oh, and I forgot something else. There is another debt that needs to be paid to Ansarullah in Yemen for the bombing of the city of Hodeidah and the destruction of the port. So Israel is adding all of these things as if they are saying, I am making it very clear. I'm not interested in any ceasefire agreements. I want Hamas to leave that. And of course, American media is going to blame it on Hamas. I mean, you killed the former prime minister of Palestine and the leader of Hamas. And of course, American media is going to blame Hamas if they say, you know what, we're not going to do ceasefire talks anymore. Because Palestinians, are, under no circumstance, should have the kind of political agency as far as American media and politicians are concerned. But now Ansarullah needs to retaliate. Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran. I mean, this is the perfect recipe for a regional war. And honestly, I've been commenting and analyzing this subject, not just in the last 10 months, for years and years. I don't see a way out of it. I don't see a way out of the regional war if that was indeed Netanyahu's intention. And it is.
Yeah, and it almost seems like, I mean, taking it even back to the US and the position that they're in. I mean, we have basically a lame duck president. I guess you could describe Biden as that way. And then you have two, other individuals vying for the presidency. You've got Trump, who's extremely pro-Israel and extremely anti-Palestinian, as he's proven to be. And then at the same time, you have Kamala Harris, who's extremely pro-Israel, and we don't really know what else she has other than rhetoric. So it almost feels as though Netanyahu is going, okay, if I have the opportunity to get away with whatever I want to do, that's exactly what I'm going to do. But yeah, I mean, as you're pointing out there, when it comes to everything Israel has done just in the last well, I guess 24 hours, but maybe we'll add a couple days. It is almost just shocking to see. It's like, okay, now Iran has to respond in some way. Hezbollah has to respond, as you brought up there. The fact that Israel just bombed a suburb in Beirut, I mean, that is shocking as well. It's almost shocking to me that Israel is acting so brazenly. And I say that even after, 10 months of watching them carry out massacre after massacre, targeting the Palestinian people in Gaza in ways that just feel unimaginable, and yet they continue to ramp up those tensions. When it comes to the axis of resistance as a whole, as we've seen, I would say there's been a lot of patience, a lot of really a strategic approach to this coming from Ansar Allah, Hezbollah, Iran as a whole. They've made it clear, look, we don't want a regional war. We do want you to stop with your genocidal war against the Palestinians. That's what we're fighting for. But we don't want this to spill out into an entire regional war. So, what are your concerns for the way that things stand now and kind of the response that Israel is provoking from all sides here?
I think something fundamentally changed, Rachel, in the Netanyahu's visit to Washington. I'm not sure what exactly that did Netanyahu want to achieve, but it seems that in his mind he did achieve it. And based on his behavior immediately after the end of his visit, in fact, shortly before his abrupt end to his visit, is that he feels that he got it. And I think what he was looking for a blank check. He wanted to show himself as more beloved, more accepted, more validated, uh, as an American politician. I'm talking about Netanyahu here, not as an Israeli leader, but as an American politician. It seems that he's more popular with American politicians than he is popular amongst his own people, among his own MPs in the Israeli Knesset, among his even own political party, because even his political party, the Likud, is divided between him, Gallant, and others. So he comes to the United States, and we kind of laughed a little bit at the whole standing ovation thing, 39, I think, standing ovations that he received in Congress. And we used it to highlight how, bought and sold the American Congress is, how embarrassing that you have a leader that stands there and belittle your own people, attack your own protesters, call them useful idiots while they are practicing their First Amendment right. And the congressmen stand in jubilation and excitement, and they clap and they clap. It reminds me of the final scene of Animal Farm,
Yeah.
the novel where the pigs and their allies meet at the very end, and all the poor animals are looking from outside, like what is going on in there. But this is what it was. But I think in a way we were a bit rash in our analysis. I think exactly what he wanted was not support from Trump or Kamala Harris or others. I think he wanted the standing ovations. And he used the standing ovations to come back to Israel and say, you know what? I have the blank check. The Americans are clapping for me unconditionally. And now I can do exactly what I wanted to do. I can carry out the original plan in which I hesitated and hesitated. I want a regional war. And using that war, I'm going to push the Palestinians out of Gaza. Because if he pushes Palestinians out of Gaza now, there will be an international uproar. Egypt might not allow this. There will be pushback. But if you do this under the guise of a regional war, few are going to pay attention because there's going to be a mess everywhere. And he feels that that mess is worthy of a price if he achieves his ultimate goal of ethnically cleansing the Palestinian people. And the sad spectacle is that he used the Druze, the Syrians who are occupied, living in this town called Majd al-Shams in northern Israel. It's a Syrian town. It's under Israeli occupation the exact same way that the Gaza Strip is under Israeli occupation. And international law recognizes it as such. And the vast majority of the people of this town have refused any Israeli efforts to co-opt him or to give them Israeli citizenship in exchange for them disowning their Syrian identity. So instead of fabricating, and I really do think that this missile that fell on Majd al-Shams was a fabrication. It just doesn't make any sense. Why would Hezbollah, at a time that they are building this massive unity throughout the country, not just with the Sunnis, not just with the Christians, but with the Druze as well. And the leader of the Druze in Lebanon, Walid Jumblat, stands time and again and says, "We are with the resistance. You take us in any directions you want to. We trust you and we put our faith in your hand 100%." Why would Hezbollah go and target these very people who are standing by them? It makes no sense. And to see the reaction to this massacre of children in Majd al-Shams by the most notorious and racist of Israeli politicians. I mean, these are the people who made careers out of hating anyone who's not Jewish. They attack the Arabs, the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims with the same intensity and the same fervor. And suddenly, the likes of Itamar bin Gvir makes a statement: burn Lebanon, kill Hassan Nasrallah, in exchange for killing Jewish children, Muslim children, Arab children. It just doesn't make any sense. But Netanyahu declared his trip is in the US is over. I am back to Israel. It is time for war, if that's what it takes. So clearly the entire spectacle was, kind of engineered on purpose. Let's respond to that by attacking Beirut, even though American officials, speaking on condition of anonymity to various media, said that Israel will not attack Lebanon, Beirut in particular. It will be a limited attack, to the point that actually some of us may have bought into this, but they attacked Beirut anyway. And they targeted the second or third man in Hezbollah. So and then they kill Ismail Haniya. And by the way, just shortly before we started our chat, they bombed the journalists in Gaza near Ismail Haniya's house in the Shati refugee camp, who are there to report on his assassination, and they killed two prominent journalists and injured a number of others, including two of Al Jazeera journalists. So Israel is going into the most extreme of its behavior that we have seen. And yes, even by the standards of an actual genocide taking place in Gaza. If the Americans do not rein in Israel, the United States, within the matter of days, will find itself in a war that is far bigger than its invasion of Iran.
Yeah, wow, that is I didn't know that about the journalists who were just killed, and my heart goes out to them. I mean, they are doing the hardest job right there on the ground, and to think that they've been targeted, as Israel has targeted just an unprecedented amount of journalists as well as civilians. And lastly, I wanted to ask you about the situation with the Palestinians right now, because I mean, and I'm really glad you brought up that point about kind of the chaos that Israel is creating everywhere, right? Because it's like we're looking at Hezbollah, we're looking at Iran, and with so much going on, what's being left has been the Palestinian people, who are going on 10 months now of this just awful blockade, constant bombardment, and now Israel's new strategy to go, I shouldn't even say new, but their current strategy of forcing them to go from one area to the next, and forcing them to, become refugees all over again, going to somewhere where there are no resources that will actually help them. What are your concerns for where the Palestinians are right now? How much longer they are able to hold on under the current predicament? Because even if Israel starts all of these different conflicts, that doesn't mean that there is any meaningful relief still for the Palestinians in Gaza.
Absolutely. I mean, when the war started, we started kind of creating these thresholds, as in, if this continues, Gaza is going to run out of electricity in this number of days, or clean water, or medicine, or food. Well, all of these thresholds and limits have been reached a long time ago. I don't understand how Gaza is even surviving at this point, if you call that survival. It is worse than anything that the Palestinian people have been through. And I also think that it has crossed all the limits of a human endurance. So this is a new territory for us, not only as Palestinians or Gazans, but as a human beings. I mean, how How much can you go without food or medicine or freedom or running from one place to the other? And the saddest thing, I mean, Israel was in East Khan Yunis, in southern Gaza. They were there for a good number of days. They left. Hundreds of bodies were mutilated in the streets. They leave, and the people, take their mattresses and their pillows and blankets and go back, and they collect the dead, and they put them in a mass grave, and they go back to the same homes. Some of them, most of them are no longer standing. They pitch their tents beside their homes, and they wait for the new Israeli order for them to evacuate. And they do. They either go to Deir al-Balah or to Rafah or to Mawasi area, where they get shelled there, massacred there, and they keep going back and forth and back and forth. I don't have words anymore. I really don't know what can be said. I mean, I want to talk about how proud I am of how resilient my people are. I want to explain to your listeners the concept of sumud and how, the steadfastness of the Palestinians, the legendary steadfastness of the Palestinians. But it's reaching a point that I don't even understand anymore. I don't understand anymore. I hear from my relatives once in a while, from my sister in Khan Yunis once in a while, and she just very quick comments. I want to live enough so I can see you, or see your children, or just things like there is death that's hovering all over Gaza. No one is immune. No one, not a group of people, not a gender, not a category, not a profession, not anybody who is immune to this. And we're watching and we comment, and sometimes we take the time to put a social media post out there, but they are left ultimately alone. And again, even by the poor standards of the international community that left Palestinians alone for 76 years, you would think that this time is going to be different, because we are talking about extermination per the language of the International Criminal Court, genocide per the language of the International Court of Justice. So if you are aware of the fact that it is genocide and it is extermination, why not a single country, why not a single army, with a single entity taking any meaningful action to end this genocide? I don't understand anymore.
Yeah, I know. Getting to this point, I mean, it just feels unimaginable that the international community would not do more to step in, as we're literally watching a genocide being live streamed before our very eyes, and yet so little is being done. I think that it is definitely going to be remembered, when we look back at this time in history, and we remember the countries, the groups that did fight and that did something, at least what they could do for the Palestinians, versus those that did not, and that decided to literally stand up and applaud someone like Netanyahu after welcoming him into their chamber, knowing that he is, well, will eventually be pursued for war crimes charges if the ICC can get it together on their end. There is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking
Doug, welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here.
I would love to, if we could have you come on and talk about some of the, finer nuances of things and lay out some visions about what the U.S. should do or so, which we probably should do that anyway. But man, it seems like there's so many things going on that we need your expertise on what's happening right now, and to kind of alert people to some of the hidden dangers of what our U.S. policymakers are doing. And man, is this ever an example of that? Obviously, the situation in the Middle East has been roiling for a long time, especially since the explosion in October of last year, and things just got a lot worse in the last few days. And before we get into a lot of that, I want to bring in the U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who was asked whether we would be participating if anything goes hot in the war against Lebanon.
If Israel is attacked, we certainly will help defend Israel. You saw us do that in April. You can expect to see us do that again. But we don't want to see any of that happen. We're going to work hard to make sure that we're doing things to help take the temperature down. and address issues through diplomatic means.
Okay, so I wonder if you can interpret, we're seeking a diplomatic means when he's leading with, oh yeah, if Israel is attacked, we're going to be with them. And of course, the last time that did happen, when we did fight, when he mentioned the last time, it was because Israel attacked and destroyed an embassy facility in Syria, which violated every international norm that you can imagine for centuries. And then they were attacked and we went in to help them. What do you hear when you hear him talk about we will defend Israel if they get attacked by Hezbollah?
I think that has to be interpreted as reinforcement of the guarantee that was given in private to Mr. Netanyahu that if he decides to widen the war in the region, which I think he's done, and take on both Hezbollah and Iran, as well as the militias in the region, that we are going to support him. That, after all, is the real reason behind his visit to the United States. I mean, he enjoys the accolades that are showered on him when he comes to visit, and he loves to be seen by his own population effectively in charge of Washington, which he is. I mean, he controls more of what happens here right now, particularly in foreign and defense policy, than Joe Biden likely. So he's gotten what he wanted from key figures inside the administration, in the cabinet, but most important also from the Senate and the House. Remember, there was only one Republican who absented himself from the speech, as I recollect. I think that's Thomas Massie. There were eight or nine Democrats who didn't show up, but virtually everyone else was there. So that was a sign of American fealty to Israel. And he's got the guarantees that he wanted. And now you see additional forces being sent to the region. Once again, a clear and unambiguous signal that we're ready to fight alongside the Israelis.
Now, this could go sideways pretty quick. I mean, and I want to look at two separate aspects of this, because first of all, there's the potential incursion into Lebanon against Hezbollah by Israel. But then there's also the potential that this could escalate to include Iran. I want to look at those separately. So first of all, just talk about from the military perspective, is for the IDF, after having fought almost 10 months of war now in the Gaza Strip, do they have the capacity and the ammunition supplies, by the way, to launch an incursion into southern Lebanon, which, you know, by all accounts, the Hezbollah has been basically preparing for since 2007, 2008 for this kind of conflict?
Well, I think the Israelis certainly have the ammunition they need. We've provided almost without question anything they asked for. So I don't think there's a shortage on the ammunition side. Now, the ground force, as you know, is much like a large Army National Guard. You have very competent, exceptionally professional people at the top who know what they're doing. But once you get down below the lieutenant colonel and below level, you're running into large numbers of people who are effectively reservists or guardsmen. They are not extraordinarily well trained, although I'm sure they've gotten a lot of good training and experience in over the last 10 months. They've taken a number of casualties. I've seen all sorts of figures, something like 70,000 casualties, 4,000 or 5,000 dead. I have no idea because, as we know, the first casualty in war is always the truth. Neither the Israelis nor anybody else involved in this is willing to tell anybody the truth. So we don't know. But I think we can say with some certainty that the ground force has been stretched. But keep something in mind. The Israelis see this as primarily an air and missile campaign. With the ground force, it will go in to mop up. And I'm talking specifically about Hezbollah. We are also viewing this as an air and missile campaign. And that, if for no other reason, because we don't have much to send in terms of ground forces. So
I want to look at that. You're talking about the missile forces. One of the things that seemed evident from I think it was June strike when Iran sent 350 missiles and drones, and the Iron Dome allegedly, anyway, knocked out 95% or something like that. But it was in analysis afterwards. We had Professor Ted Postel on, who said when you look at it, actually, many of the missiles were not intercepted, and many of those that were designed to be shot down to try to avoid escalation. But he said that if Iran had actually wanted to harm Israel, they could have picked a lot different targets and caused a lot more damage. And Hezbollah, number one, the time of flight now is far less than they would have. They have more of these missiles. There's some suggestion that the Iron Dome may not be very effective at all, and it could Israel could be seriously harmed by the Hezbollah missiles.
Well, the Iron Dome has never performed to the level as advertised. 90+% intercepts. That's always been nonsense. So no, they're getting something in the neighborhood of 50 to 60% of what's out there. But keep in mind that everyone's missile arsenal or stocks are designed to exhaust the air defense capability. So you can run the Israelis, and for that matter, us, out of anti-missile missiles very quickly. Doesn't take very long. And we are not disposing over hot manufacturing lines or building missiles and rockets hand over fist on a daily basis. So we have limited supplies. The Iranians and the Shiites in Hezbollah are in a different position. What we don't know is how this will begin. I think it's pretty obvious that you're going to get a major war in the region. That's unfortunate. A lot of us have tried very hard to persuade everyone not to go down this road, but I think Mr. Netanyahu will. As a result, I think there will be an attack on Hezbollah by Israel. Now, bear in mind, you've got Lloyd Austin saying we're going to help them if they're attacked. Well, they're already under attack. And the Israeli attitude is that we're the permanent victims in the region. So whatever we do is defense anyway.
Yeah.
So that's a foregone conclusion. What kind of assistance are we going to provide other than logistical and munitions? We are going to provide as much air and naval power as we can mobilize. And that will be directed wherever the Israelis, frankly, urge us to go. Now, we're obviously prepared to attack Iran. If we see evidence that the Iranians are going to join in this fight, we've got target overlays. We're definitely ready to go. The question is what happens with Hezbollah? And, I've said from the beginning that I think the Israelis know that the Hezbollah fight is an existential one. And the only way to win that is to pulverize Hezbollah with everything they've got. And that may include tactical nuclear weapons.
Okay. Now, I want to look at it from a slightly different perspective. So our country, our choice. I know you're also very interested in the U.S. Constitution, following the rule of law within our own country, et cetera. When I hear Austin categorically saying, not even the president, but the Secretary of Defense saying, yes, we're going to help Israel fight if they get into a war. Mm-hmm. Where did the Congress ever authorize the United States to get into war? Because what you just described right before I brought this question up is something that could potentially expand into target sets in Iran. And that, by definition, is a war. And how can we get into something like this if it's not authorized by Congress in the U.S. Constitution?
Well, as we know, Washington is donor-occupied territory. Everybody who clapped vigorously for Mr. Netanyahu has been the beneficiary of the Israel lobby's largesse. I mean, if you go back and look at their campaigns and look at who pours money into their political action committees and helps them stay in office, the lobby has a big role in that. So do the pharmaceuticals, so do the defense industries. So Congress really isn't responding to the American people. The Constitution is a wonderful document, but I don't think anybody's paid much attention to it for a very long time. So we are living in, I'm afraid, a post-constitutional environment. This is one of the reasons that, we talk about where do we put our emphasis, because we can't fight every battle. And at Our Country, Our Choice, we talk all the time about the criticality of the Bill of Rights. And we have to fight to the bitter end to preserve those. Those are also under attack because those are frequently inconvenient. We've already seen legislation passed creating special categories of Americans that deserve more protection than others. And we've also seen attempts to shut down free speech that doesn't suit the majority that happens to be in power at the moment. So these are big problems. They're all bound up together. But the truth of the matter is, Americans, when I say Americans, I always caveat that by saying, well, who are the Americans? I mean, you and I are Americans. We're people that just say, if you ask us on the street, what are you? I say, I'm an American. I don't say I'm something else an American. I don't say I'm an American and then something else. I just say, hey, I'm an American. That's it, just an American. Now, those people who are just Americans have really not engaged. They've got to get engaged. So if you don't signal to people on the Hill that in theory represents you, that you are utterly opposed to this madness, well, then the madness is going to happen. And you have yourself to thank for it. And right now we've got a lot of people that are either not paying attention or have foolishly signed on for the nonsense.
Well, and let me just show you one more piece of the nonsense. So I just showed you the Secretary of Defense talking categorically how he's ready to send U.S. forces to assist another country that doesn't belong to our forces. But then here's John Kirby, who I think you might charitably say is stretching the truth or obscuring the truth, because what he is claiming here is that we're just looking for peace. We're all about negotiated settlement. Watch this.
All of this adds to the complicated nature of what we're trying to get done. And what we're trying to get done is a ceasefire deal that can get you 6 weeks in phase one, get a lot of hostages, the most at risk, out of there and home with their families, and get some more humanitarian assistance in. Based on the constructive conversations that we had with the Prime Minister last week, we still believe that this is a worthy endeavor. We still believe that the gaps can be narrowed, the details can be fleshed out, and a deal can be had. Now, again, it's too soon to know what these recent events over the last 24, 48 hours are going to do to the process. I don't want to sound overly sanguine here, but we still believe the deal on the table is worth pursuing, and the hostages need to come home, and we're not going to stop trying to work on that.
It's hard for me to even just keep my composure when I hear this official statement by the senior White House spokesman say that our constructive conversations with Netanyahu last week are still hopeful that we can get a deal, ceasefire, get the hostages back at Hall, when the events that he was referring to there is the assassination of the negotiating partner on the Hamas side, all but killing any kind of possibility of constructive talks. So how to view those things when they say that such things that seem so at odds with truth?
The short explanation is that this government and the society they currently dominate right now has been Sovietized. It all reminds me of 1968. And I was alive in 1968 and quite aware of what was happening. In fact, I was in what used to be called Czechoslovakia about a week and a half before the Soviets intervened there. But there was a crisis in Czechoslovakia as far as Moscow was concerned, because the Czechoslovak Republic had suddenly blossomed into something everyone called the Prague Spring, which was designed to quietly democratize the government, to enhance the rights and privileges of the citizenry, to suppress the use of the secret police and the political apparatus. Well, from Moscow's standpoint, this was a terrible threat. And I remember listening to the translations of the announcement. Today, the commander of the Warsaw Pact announced that the unrest and civil disobedience and the potential for outright revolution in the Czechoslovak People's Republic has gone too far. Now the forces of liberation, the Soviet armed forces and their brotherly armed forces from surrounding Warsaw Pact members, will go in and rescue the Czechoslovak population from the danger of a counter-revolution that could destroy socialism and derail the progress that's been made for several years. I mean, it's the same sort of nonsense. We know the rest of the story. They went in, they crushed what was happening. And the Czechs in particular were very funny because they stood around and said, well, let's change all the street signs so the Soviets can't find their way around Prague and other kinds of things. But there wasn't a whole hell of a lot they could do. Well, we have a similar situation now in Washington. We're in the business of saying, oh, no, the sky is not blue. It's actually deep purple. And there are no clouds in the sky. Ignore those large black fluffy things up there. That's not at all a danger. But on the other hand, we're very concerned about the white clouds, and those white clouds have to be carefully monitored. The world is being stood on its head. So it's one lie on top of another lie. No one is interested right now in Israel in peace. And as long as Mr. Netanyahu and his electorate are not interested in peace, neither is the United States Congress. Now, whatever the American people think is irrelevant.
That's not very encouraging, but that's kind of how I see it. And there's one other person that kind of sees it that way, and we at least have one good one to put in here. This is former Ambassador Chaz Freeman, who was responding to what Kirby and some of these other people have been saying about what the U.S. government is claiming to do. Here's what they actually are doing.
I believe it represents an effort by Prime Minister Netanyahu, which he began 9 months ago, to entangle the United States in Israel's wars with the Palestinians and its neighbors. And I think if you are serious about negotiating a hostage release and a ceasefire, you don't murder your opposite number at the negotiating table. So any doubt that anyone may have had about whether Israel was sincere in pursuing an agreement with Palestinians has now been eliminated.
Well, hard to add much onto that, but I mean, he's one of the few that's calling it like it is. But
well,
then
I might just say very briefly, use the word sincerely. I think Mr. Netanyahu is sincerely interested in the elimination of all the Arabs that currently live in what he calls Greater Israel. A journalist returned not long ago from the Middle East and reported that he actually saw Israeli soldiers wearing a patch that depicts Greater Israel. In other words, Israel consists of everything between the river and the sea, between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, and the Palestinian enclaves have vanished. They don't exist. Now, I don't know whether or not that also included everything south of the Litani River, but I think Mr. Netanyahu is sincerely interested in annihilating everything south of the Litani River. And if Iran, which I think will happen, inevitably intervenes, then he's comfortable now that the United States will act on his behalf to utterly destroy and pulverize Iran into submission.
Well, I mean, Austin just flat out said that. So, I mean, I think it's pretty confirmed from our government. But then on top of all that, then we also, and I'd be remiss if I didn't show our lead diplomat here, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who threw his 2 cents in.
Hania was involved in ceasefire talks in Gaza. What impact is his death going to have?
Well, of course, I've seen the reports, and what I can tell you is this: first, this is something we were not aware of or involved in. It's very hard to speculate, and I've learned over many years never to speculate on the impact one event may have on something else. So I can't tell you what this means. I can tell you that the imperative of getting a ceasefire, the importance that has for everyone remains. And we will continue to labor at that for as long as it takes to get there.
Doug, it's hard for me to stomach these kinds of statements, which we've been hearing for many months now. And also you can add a whole new category regarding the Russia-Ukraine war from Anthony Blinken. But when he keeps talking about we're actually seeking peace, and you see every action does the opposite, as Gary and I were talking earlier today on a different topic, it's like our trust in anybody in our government at the top levels is just getting shredded by the day.
Well, there are 2 things that we should keep in mind. First, General Sisi's staff commented after Blinken last visited Egypt that the general and his staff had grown tired of listening to Mr. Blinken repeat Mr. Netanyahu's talking points. So I think that's the first thing we need to keep in mind. Mr. Blinken is doing an excellent job of everything that Mr. Netanyahu wants him to do. Number 2, and this is equally important in my judgment, he's interested, as is most of Washington, in buying as much time as possible for the Israelis to complete their task of creating Greater Israel. In other words, eliminate all of the Arabs in Gaza and the West Bank. And they now realize that that's not going to happen unless they can also bring to heel Hezbollah and subjugate that area. So we are buying time for them to do that. Now, it has now moved beyond buying time because it can't be done, certainly not in the time frame that they would like. And instead, what you've got is brewing a new war. Normally, you would expect the American government to intervene and say, well, look, we're not prepared for a major war. We didn't commit to that. But the truth is, behind closed doors, that's exactly what we've committed to do. That's what Mr. Austin said, and that's exactly what we're about to do. We are going to involve ourselves in a war with not only Hezbollah, but also Iran. And we can go over this 1,000 times. All of the Arab states in the region are horrified and afraid. The elites don't want any wars, but their populations are angry on a scale that one can't imagine with what's happened to the Arabs in Gaza. But you also have another problem. You have the rest of the world, and you have Russia and China, and increasingly Turkey. Turkey is trying to build nuclear reactors to improve its energy position. It's trying to stabilize its economy, so it has worked hard to stay out of the fight. But the Turks aren't going to be able to stay out of the fight if the Israelis march into South Lebanon and initiate this campaign of annihilation, which I think we have to expect. And I think that's what the Turks are worried about. So you could have the entire region finally engaged in this. Can we actually compensate for whatever power Israel doesn't has and needs? I don't know, but I think it's going to be tough. But obviously, Mr. Erdogan is confident that we can ensure that he prevails.
Now, Erdogan has a reputation for a lot of incendiary language. He used a lot of incendiary language, especially shortly after the Gaza operation began last October and November. And a lot of people said, oh, just don't worry about what he says because he's just talking to his domestic audience. Maybe there's some justification to some of that. This one has a sense, it feels a little different to me because he's being very specific in some of the things that have been attributed to him, that if Israel goes into Lebanon, then he said he would attack into Israel. Do you think there's any set of circumstances where a NATO ally, Turkey, would actually go to war against Israel?
Well, first of all, I think NATO is largely a paper organization. And that's something that Americans don't realize. And if anything, behind the scenes in Europe, NATO is crumbling. Turkey has been on the outs with NATO, as we say, for a very long time. Membership, as far as the Turks are concerned, in NATO and in the European Union, they've never gotten into the EU, but they've been promised the opportunity. None of that has ever paid off. And the Turks have had to make a decision. It's a decision the Europeans need to make, and they're afraid to. But the Turks have said, look, we're Turks. We're Muslim Turks. We're not Europeans. We're not part of Europe, per se. And that's a fact. The Turks have decided, well, we've had it. We've tried everything we can. We're not going to bother with you anymore. And so the notion that the Turks could become involved in this, I think, is completely legitimate and should be expected. So I don't think NATO means anything at all. I've always been concerned, and I expressed this view to President Trump, both written and otherwise, back in December of 2020, that we should get our troops, our forces, and everything we own out of Turkey. Because at some point, our troops on the ground in Turkey could become hostages. And remember, we still have some nuclear weapons in Turkey. We got to get them out because this is no longer the Cold War. We're in a different world now. Turkey is a sovereign state. It's going to behave in accordance with what it thinks is its interests. It's not aligned with us. If anybody thinks that the things you and I are discussing about Israel are not understood or appreciated in the Middle East or Asia, they're deluded. We are viewed as Israel's tool.
Well,
we are seen as being governed by Israel.
Yeah,
Israel is seen as dominating us, not the other way around.
To underscore that, painfully so, this was part of Netanyahu's speech before a joint session of Congress where he's trying to claim that, hey, we're all in this together.
I choose my words carefully. We've jointly developed some of the most sophisticated weapons on earth that help protect both our countries. And we also help keep American boots. We help keep Americans' boots off the ground while protecting our shared interests in the Middle East.
So it's our shared interest in the Middle East for the United States to get sucked into a war. And by the way, you mentioned a second ago that it was Austin's words that said that we're going to, well, despite whatever the Secretary of the State said, here's what's actions is happening, that 12 U.S. warships are now reported to be steaming into the area as the tensions rise here. So it seems that we're actually getting ready to do Netanyahu's bidding.
Well, obviously, and once again, as we mentioned earlier, we don't have the ground force to put in there. I'm told that there's some consideration is being given to putting a Marine force of perhaps 2,000 on the ground in Israel. We'll see whether or not that happens. Obviously, 2,000 Marines on the ground in Israel guarantees that somebody's going to get killed if you go to war with Hezbollah and Iran. It's going to be impossible to avoid having something fall on you. But it's not going to make a great deal of difference to the outcome on the ground. Let's be frank, the numbers are just too small. So I don't know, but I think air and missile power, that's where we're headed. And we've got probably as much as we can load onto any of the platforms, the Aegis cruisers, destroyers, plus the aircraft carriers. And we're prepared to fight. And we will go in and we will attack shoulder to shoulder with the Israelis. And we will end up at war with, I suspect, most of the Middle East. And I think we're probably going to end up dealing with the fallout here at home inside the United States, because we've got these open borders. We don't know who's in the country. I think we do have an inkling of what's in the country. And I think from the standpoint of the people running the administration and the government, they might think this is a great thing. You know, if we can drag the American people in the United States into a permanent state of conflict with everyone in the region, that's good for Israel. I think I have to view it that way.
Okay, let me look, kind of drill down on the military perspective for a second. If we can say, and for the sake of this argument, let's just say that nuclear escalation can be avoided, and we'll see how that works out. But just from a military conventional perspective, it seems to me that in the modern era, of course, air and missile power is absolutely essential and crucial and vital. But it's also not enough. I think you've said several times, you still have to have a land force, because you can't take and hold terrain unless you have somebody on the ground. You can throw missiles all over the place, but you can't gain anything. So my concern is, or my question rather, is on what basis does Israel want to fight with Lebanon, in southern Lebanon? Now they can, because they can physically go and take around there. But if you also drag in Iran into it, you can throw a bunch of missiles, but you're not going to go and take Iran, especially this tiny little Israel, even if they got us fully engaged. So what is the end state that even is achievable for Israel to not have a permanently hostile Iran if they go into war with them?
Well, the Israeli end state is greater Israel, as a minimum, what we described earlier, and they think that's achievable. That may be. I don't know. I have my doubts, but that's their firm conviction. No one is interested in taking and holding anything, least of all Americans. There's nothing to take and hold that's of any real value to us. I think the interest is in destroying Iran, not holding it, not utilizing it or exploiting it, but destroying it.
Right, but
Iran is a large country.
We can't destroy Iran, right? I mean, we can cause lots of damage, but we can't destroy it just with air and missile power, right?
Well, you can do it. You can do an awful lot of damage. You have to look at where the population of Iran is actually concentrated. Much of Iran is desert and mountain, where there frankly isn't much. It's an area larger than Western Europe. So look at where the 79 million Iranians live. It's not very difficult to destroy their water supply, destroy their power grid, destroy ultimately over time their armed forces. That can be done. Now, it's not going to be easy. They're going to fight back, and they have some capability now that they did not years ago. And I'm talking about their ability to reach out and touch us, to attack our 26 bases in the region and kill Americans. There's no doubt about it. But you can do so much damage that you create another wave of refugees and migrants that start going where? Well, they'll pour into Turkey. They're going to go north. They're going to try and go into Europe. They're not going to sit there and be destroyed, starve to death, or end up dying for lack of water. I mean, you can inflict those kinds of damages. You don't need to go into the country. And I think the Air Force is probably, and the Navy is salivating at the prospect, because that's what they've always theorized could be done. You could win a war without any ground force. Well, if your only goal is destruction and murder, they have a point, because there's no reason why we would want to intervene on the ground in Iran. There's nothing there for us. Why are we doing it? So We are essentially extending the range and capability of Israeli striking power, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and so forth. That's what we're doing. And that can do a lot of damage. Now, we haven't discussed who else may object to the total destruction of the Iranian state and the mass destruction of its people. There are other states out there that are not going to be particularly excited about that. Clearly, the Pakistanis are not going to be excited. I don't think India will be excited by it. I know the Russians are going to be horrified if that happens. And again, we come back to Turkey. Turks aren't going to like it. If you go to Northeast Asia, it's not just the Chinese who want access to the Straits of Hormuz, which would likely be closed. It's also Japan, Korea, a number of other states in the region that depend on access to those fossil fuels. In other words, this has global impact. The impact is not just in the region, it's global, and it's going to be economic, it's going to be political and military. And at some point, we may discover that we're up against far, far more adversaries and opponents than we reckoned would be the case.
Okay.
Again,
And
you got to distinguish the desired end state, which is greater Israel, from what is possibly going to happen that's very different from that end state. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, and there's another big, like, blinking red problem for the United States in here. So we've seen Israel when they had the Gaza Strip, which is encased in a little chain link fence, basically, and so everything was contained in there. And with all the IDF has at its disposal, 10 months later, they're still having to fight there. So the idea that they would then go up north into to the Hezbollah, where they have more troops, more defenses, et cetera, and have anything quick is just not even possible. So you're talking about, if they do, that's going to start a long lead time kind of an issue that also could be open-ended. But United States is already in a position to where our ammunition stocks are running critically low. And there was a report out just a couple of days ago that when somebody looking at the China-Taiwan issue, if we had to fight China, that we could run out of critical supplies within days in some of the interceptor missiles, and within a few weeks in many of the other key aspects of the ammunition. And that's just in that one area there. If we start still trying to support Ukraine with what we've been doing there, what we claim, while we now then have to spike in our efforts to help Israel down in this area and our own, especially if we get dragged into it, Doug, we don't have enough ammunition to last a long fight there. Forget about all these other areas that may fight. We just don't have the capacity.
But you have to weigh what you've just said, and I don't disagree with anything that you've noted, but you have to weigh that particular analysis against the analysis that is current in Washington and Jerusalem. And that analysis is there is no incentive to wait. This is the time to strike. If there were ever a point in Israel's history where it has the chance to establish its unchallenged supremacy in the region, it's now. All of its surrounding neighbors are very weak. We're talking about the Arab states. They're very weak. There's very little that they can do. They may have numbers, they may have large numbers of equipment, but they're not oriented to offensive warfare, and there's not much they can do to intervene to change things. If they could, they'd have already done it. So that means that within the region, your principal concern, other than Hezbollah, is Iran, and they dismiss out of hand the possibility that Turkey will ever do anything. I mean, that's the conventional wisdom in Israel. No, the Turks won't intervene. We can ignore that. It's sort of similar to the Germans in 1914, who absolutely did not believe that the British would intervene. You know, similar mentality. So from their vantage point, you're never going to have a better shot, because you really have now, if you're Mr. Netanyahu sitting in Jerusalem, you have absolute control of the United States Armed Forces and its capacities. But you're a realist. You know, that's not going to last forever. You don't know what the next election is going to bring. Yeah, sure, you've essentially bought what I call the right wing of the Uniparty, which we call Republican. That's purchased. But is it reliable over the long haul? May or may not be. Then you have the left wing of the Uniparty under Kamala Harris. You've got serious reservations about it, because they call themselves the party of color. They're distinctly racist in their attitudes towards white people, and they don't like Israel. So, you know, you got to put yourself in the position of Mr. Netanyahu, and you say, if I have to pick a point in time to do this, This is it. So let's pull out all the stops. Let's go for broke, and we can win everything at one stroke. Okay. See how that works out.
Yeah, you know, it's ironic because from a certain perspective, I observe the same thing, especially diplomatically. They'll never have another chance to actually launch this stuff and have muted if or no response, you know, to some of these actions, et cetera, and the support of the United States. But we keep getting back into that thing you talk about for most of your career about ends and means. And so, yeah, you may want to accomplish this, but if you don't have the capacity to do so, to go starting on that road without the ability to rationally bring it to a conclusion, I mean, you're setting yourself up for disaster. And to me, there is no prospect that Israel can actually militarily conquer this territory, even using the U.S. Armed Forces, before we run out of capacity, or there's so many more enemies join in and we can't match them all. This is a suicide mission to me, Doug.
Well, remember the Tsar of Russia went through a similar calculation at the beginning of World War I. And the Russian general staff convinced the Tsar that his army was so enormous and he had so many troops, so many forces, that the Germans would simply be overwhelmed and run out of manpower and be incapable of fighting against Russia, that the Russians would overwhelm them. And he signed on for the calculation. If you look at the numbers and some of the underpinning assumptions, you could make a good argument for what he said. Of course, it ignored everything else. It ignored technology. It ignored the nature of the Germans and their training and their education and their leadership and so forth. There's something else that your viewers should consider doing, and that is on the internet. You can Google it, and you can actually listen to about 10 minutes of a transcript. A conversation that was captured in Finland in 1942 between Adolf Hitler and Field Marshal von Mannerheim, who was the commander-in-chief of Finnish forces and the leader of Finland at the time. And Adolf Hitler had flown in to see Mannerheim. I think the occasion was Mannerheim's birthday. I don't remember. But it's a wonderful 10 minutes. It's very revealing because you hear him not as this persona we see in the newsreels, but as a normal human being speaking. And one of the things that Hitler says, he tells Mannerheim, you know, we were astonished when we overran the Ukraine and reached Kharkov and these other places. We found factories where they were producing 30, 40,000 tanks, where we saw hundreds of thousands of people who were effectively slaves working in these factories. He said, good Lord, who in their right mind builds 40 or 50,000 tanks in peacetime? For Hitler, this was incomprehensible. And then he said something that's very, very important to remember. He said, you know, if we had known this, we wouldn't have invaded Russia. We wouldn't have gone into the Soviet Union. Well, wow. What is the logical conclusion if you realize the gravity of his statement? The logical conclusion is stop, pull back, cut a deal. This is bigger than you thought. You may win at the moment, but long term, the prospects are bad. Well, there was no thinking about that. Napoleon Bonaparte reached Smolensk and he held a council of war in 1812. And he said, I think we've gone far enough. I think we should turn back. This is ridiculous. He actually said that. You can read it. His adjutant wrote it up. And it was his generals and his marshals who said, oh, no, we're too close now. We need to march on. Bonaparte said, why? And they gave him all these reasons. And grudgingly, after 2 or 3 hours of discussion, he relented and said, all right, we'll march on to Moscow. He realized this was a dumb idea. So the real question is, why do people double down on dumb ideas even when they realize it's a dumb idea? Well, there are all sorts of reasons. There's a whole psychology behind it. I think that that's going to happen to Mr. Netanyahu and his friends. I think they're going to realize that. I think people in Washington are going to end up in a very similar position. We didn't sign up for this. We didn't expect this. Well, what are we going to do now? And everybody's going to say exactly what you heard when you were in Afghanistan, what I heard about Iraq. I remember having these conversations, and General Petraeus, I was visiting in November 2005 in Leavenworth. And he said, well, what do you think about Iraq? I said, I think we should leave. And he said, "Oh, we can't just leave." But the point is, we always do. You can't just leave. Oh, yes, you can. What did we do? We ultimately left. What are we going to do now in the face of what's happening at the conclusion of these hostilities with all of these penny packets of troops all over the region? Whatever's alive at the end, we're just going to leave. There's nothing there for us. There never was. So what are we doing here? When a friend of mine used to say, Doug, when you have no strategy, in other words, when there's no purpose, method, end state, when you haven't thought anything through, you end up in a place called Stalingrad. And you look around and say, okay, now what?
Yeah.
I think that's where we're headed collectively.
That's exactly what I fear. You just put more eloquently than I did, but that's the exact conclusion that I reach when I look at the ends and means and the stated objectives. They just don't line up. They don't match, and that inevitably leads to that point. We're probably beyond that point already in the Russia-Ukraine war, and we'll discover to our chagrin what's going to happen there. Probably something similar to what happened in Afghanistan, except on a bigger scale, which hopefully won't expand beyond that. But you start adding too many of these things in, and we don't have time to talk about it now. But if a lot of people are also pointing and posturing to go into the Indo-Pacific, and they just keep poking China over the Taiwan issue, and it's like, man, what are these people thinking? There was I will talk about it in just a second. You've probably seen it. There's a commission that was released by the United States Congress where they said, hey, we're vastly underutilized on our defense industrial base, and we need to fix that. And they said what we need to be able to do simultaneously is to defend the homeland, fight little wars like Afghanistan and Iraq, fight and defeat Russia if need be, fight and defeat China if need be, and fight and defeat Iran if need be. All of that simultaneously, and they want to have a defense to match with it. That's just lunacy and insanity in my view. But there are otherwise allegedly smart people and well-educated that are arguing for exactly that outcome.
Well, there have been a lot of smart people over the years in charge at the top of many nations that have made these kinds of mistakes. And they substitute wishful thinking for hard-nosed analysis. They replace realistic assumptions with assumptions based on what they hope will happen as opposed to what could happen. So, we're on a dangerous path. And all we can do is hope that someone at some point in time realizes exactly what we've been discussing. But, how long did it take us to ultimately get out of Vietnam? 10 years? Ridiculous. And for what? So we're quite capable of repeating the stupidity. And I think that's where we are now. And, I wish that someone would think in these terms, but politicians don't shape or change or alter public opinion. They tend to follow it. So right now, what is the public opinion? And they're going to follow it. They're followers. Some of them are sock puppets for lobbies of various kinds. That's clear, but most of them are just fellow travelers. They're in the herd. That's not helpful. And I don't see that anybody that's currently running for office, with the exception of, I think RFK Jr. really understands it all. I think Donald Trump used to, but he's so captured now by the obsession with the presidency, I think he's lost sight of all these other issues.
You know what?
All right, stop what you're doing. Take a look at this chilling new video taken by one of the men actually shot during the Trump assassination attempt. Shows a figure moving across the roof just moments before shots were fired. And today, former President Trump expected to be interviewed by the FBI about the shooting. Chris Sweckers, a former assistant FBI director, and he joins me now. Chris, of all the videos that we have seen so far, is this one the most damning when it comes to the Secret Service response? Because quite frankly, it's the audience's perspective, the crowd's perspective, and we can see something that doesn't look quite right. Where was the Secret Service?
Yeah, it's both damning and chilling. And, you know, I hark back to the testimony of the acting Secret Service director, where he went to great pains to make a case that the snipers could not have seen him. But here you can see him from the ground. So, and in plenty of time to actually intervene if need be. I mean, this was a case of just really poor execution, planning, and communication. I think the myth has been busted that the Secret Service are the best in the business. They've been going for 40 years with no incident, and I think they just got complacent.
Today, FBI victim interview of Donald Trump will take place. Maybe it's me. I just think this is going to be pro forma. Correct me if you think I'm wrong. But with each passing day, the feds, the state and local, have a blame game that just seems to grow with fingers pointed at one another, grows more and more by the day. As you have studied the information that has come to you, what story do you think is the most plausible? When you look at the information, what does the real story look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, first about Trump's interview, that you're right, that's a non-event. I mean, there's nothing he will add that the FBI doesn't already know. But I think the narrative here, the storyline here writ large, is that the Secret Service got very complacent. As I mentioned earlier, they've gone 40 years with no incident. And so they're more out there posing than they are actually implementing security measures. The blame game, to me, is the only blame is on the Secret Service. When you're working interagency operations, you have to make darn sure that your local police departments and state departments are connected in to the command center, whether they're on their own network or on the Secret Service network. It doesn't matter. There's two people from different agencies sitting right next to each other, passing information real time. That just didn't happen, but that's executive protection 101. And I just think that, that they were poorly trained and poor planning, poor execution. And you stand back, you look at the Secret Service these days, they're more investigative agency than they are a protective agency. And I think they have to reverse that. Only about 30% of their resources are doing protection.
Your former agency, the FBI, has contracted an Israeli tech firm, meantime, to help get through the encryption on the shooter's devices, that according to sources. Why? Why doesn't the FBI have this technology in-house already? I mean, we're the United States. Why do we have to contract out to an Israeli firm to get this, Chris?
Yeah, because they're better than we are at this kind of tech exploitation, forensic exploitation. We're good, but we're not as good as the Israelis. And you got these encrypted apps that are developed overseas, developed in outside the United States. And some of the information is, some of it's not stored, some of it's on the device still, but they got to crack into the password to get into the device. So I'm not surprised that they've gone to the Israelis. They just are better at it.
That doesn't make me feel reassured in any way, shape, or form, but it's honesty, and that's what we get from you, Chris Swecker, and we appreciate it.
I'm Steve Doocy.
Remarkable personal courage, putting their bodies in between the line of sight of the shooter and the president. That being said, the bravery of the line agents is quite different from the decisions of Secret Service leadership. Secret Service leadership committed catastrophic security failures, indeed the worst security failures for the Secret Service since 1981, since the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan. It is incumbent upon this committee to determine why those security failures happened. Just after the shooting, Secret Service put out an official statement from your spokesperson that says there's an untrue assertion that a member of the former president's team requested additional security resources and that those were rebuffed. This is absolutely false. In fact, we added protective resources and technology and capabilities as part of the increased campaign travel tempo. Was this tweet accurate?
With respect to Butler, Pennsylvania, it is accurate, sir.
It is accurate that the Trump team had not asked for additional security and had not been rebuffed.
If you're talking about Butler, Pennsylvania, all assets requested were approved. If you're talking about the media reporting of assets requested, there were times when assets were unavailable and not able to be filled, and those gaps were staffed with state and local law enforcement tactical assets.
So I'm reading from the Washington Post, July 20th, 2024. Secret Service said to have denied requests for more security at Trump events. The opening paragraph, top officials of the U.S. Secret Service repeatedly denied requests for additional resources and personnel sought by Donald Trump's security detail in the 2 years leading up to his attempted assassination, according to 4 people familiar with the requests. Is that right, that repeatedly the Trump detail asked for more resources and repeatedly Secret Service leadership turned that down?
That is not accurate, Senator. Assets are requested. There's a process that is made. And
how many requests did the Trump team or the Trump detail ask for?
I can get you that number in a queue.
You don't know now.
So I can speak to the ones that were reported in the Washington Post, and we can go through them if you like.
But you don't know how many requests there were.
In general, how many requests since 2021 that the former Trump detail has made a request for assets?
You've had 2 weeks. You had a spokesperson put something out that is false on its face. By the way, did you approve this statement when it went out?
I don't know if I did or didn't, Senator.
Has this spokesperson, is he still employed? Does he still have a job?
He is still employed, Senator.
So he lied on behalf of the Secret Service. He still has a job. Did your predecessor, the former director, did she approve this statement?
Senator, our comms team, they send out statements. They do deconflict them and they put them out.
Did she approve this statement?
I don't know if she did or did not, Senator.
And you don't know if you did either?
I don't recall approving it, Senator.
Will you commit to provide this committee in writing every written request for additional resources from the Trump campaign or the Trump detail and every response from Secret Service?
Senator, I will commit to providing responses and getting you the information that you are seeking.
Let me ask you something. And who makes the decision to deny those requests? Did you make that decision?
Which requests? Are you talking about the ones that were in the Washington Post?
Yes.
The process, sir, is that a detail will make a request for either staffing, technical assets, that is handled between the field office and the detail. It goes up to a logistics office between our
Okay, so there's a bureaucracy. Is there a decision maker?
It's not a bureaucracy, Senator.
Give me the
it's a
person
process.
that's a decision maker. Is there one?
Senator, it's a conversation. It's not just an absolute yay or nay.
So let me tell you what I believe. I believe that the Secret Service leadership made a political decision to deny these requests.
That's a fact.
And I think the Biden administration has been suffused with partisan politics. Did the same person who denied the request for additional security to President Trump also repeatedly deny the request for security to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whose father was murdered by an assassin and whose uncle was murdered by an assassin? Did the same person make that decision?
Senator, what I will tell you is that Secret Service agents are not political.
Okay, you're not answering my question. But you know what? Leadership appointed by the president, leadership appointed by the president is political. I have a simple question, yes or no. Did the same person deny the Trump request that also denied the RFK request? That's a yes or no question.
Senator, that is not a yes or no question. Yeah. One, there's a process for a candidate nominee to receive protection.
Does the buck stop anywhere? Does the buck stop anywhere?
Bipartisan process that the Hill
It's a bicameral, bipartisan process. What camera?
For a candidate,
you are not a Congress. You don't have a camera.
Mr. Kennedy submitted a request that was referred over to the CPAC.
Okay, you're refusing to answer the question. Let me ask, because the failures on that day were catastrophic. By the way, is it true that on the day of the Butler event that Secret Service transferred agent from President Trump to the First Lady?
No, sir, that's not true.
That's been widely reported.
It's not true. There was one airport agent that actually went on the manpower request for the Trump detail. They handled the arrival at the airport.
What was the relative size of the Trump detail compared to the detail that is assigned to the President or the First Lady?
Senator, the former president travels with a full shift, just like the president.
What's the, so the exact same size? Is that your testimony that President Trump had the same size detail that President Biden has?
On the day of in Butler, the agents surrounding him, it is the same number of agents surrounding the president today. There is a difference between a sitting president who also not only
Hold on, you're using president in a way that is not clear. Is it your testimony that in Butler, Pennsylvania, Donald Trump had the same number of agents protecting him that Joe Biden has at a comparable event?
I'm telling you the shift, the close protection shift surrounding. That's
yes
what you asked me, Senator, and I'm trying to answer it.
You are not answering it. Is it the same number of agents or not?
Senator, there is a difference between the sitting president of the United States.
Then what's the difference?
The difference?
2x, 3x, 5x,
National
10x?
Command Authority to launch a nuclear strike. Sir,
I'm not
other
asking
assets.
how many more
travel
agents
with the president that the former president will
you are
not get.
refusing to
but
answer
the number of
straight.
secret.
He already perjured himself because he already said they got the same amount that was allowed under oath.
Service
Sir,
agents
stop interrupting.
protecting him.
Stop interrupting me.
Go ahead,
You
Senator.
are refusing to answer clear and direct questions.
He answered it. He lied.
I am asking the relative difference in the number of agents between those assigned to Donald Trump and those assigned to Joe Biden. I'm not asking why you assign more to Joe Biden. I'm asking, is the difference, is it 2x? Is it 3x? Is it 5x? Is it 10x?
Senator, I will get you that number so you can see it with your own eyes.
Senator Hawley. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Rowe, can you put your first poster, your first demonstrative back up?
Please put A up, please.
Let's make sure everybody can see it. This is the photograph, I believe, that you took, your team took of the roof, the AGR roof. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so from this vantage point, as the law enforcement who are in those windows, as they look left, they should be able to see the shooter clearly there on the AGR second floor roof. My question is, why is there not a Secret Service counter sniper on that roof?
So, Senator, we're when we post up, our methodology is to look at things that can see in on our protectees so that they can provide that coverage.
But why is there not a Secret Service counter sniper there with clear line of sight? That roof has a clear line of sight to the former president. Why didn't you put a Secret Service counter sniper there?
The Secret Service's counter sniper role is to neutralize those threats that are looking in on us from where the protectee is, not necessarily
You think maybe you might want to revise that protocol in light of what happened here?
They were protecting the principal, and I think
The principal got shot.
I understand that, sir.
So do you think you might want to revise the protocol? Let me ask you this. Who was the lead site agent who made the decision to leave the AGR building completely outside of the security perimeter? Who was that?
Senator, I cannot give you that name. This person is operational. They're still doing investigations. They're still doing protective visits.
Have they been relieved of duty?
Senator, they have not
I know
been
their
relieved
name,
of
by the
duty.
way. Why have they not been relieved of duty?
They are still cooperating, not only being interviewed by the FBI, but also by our Office of Professional Responsibility. And we will let the facts of the mission assurance and any further investigations play out.
Isn't the fact that a former president was shot, that a good American is dead, that other Americans were critically wounded, isn't that enough mission failure for you to say that the person who decided that that building should not be in the security perimeter probably ought to be stepped down?
Senator, I think you're using the word decided, and I think we need to allow the investigation play out to include.
So who did make the decision then? If it wasn't the lead site agent, who made the decision not to put that in the security perimeter?
Senator, you're zeroing in on one particular agent. I want to find out exactly what was the entire decision process. So I think I want to be neutral and make sure that we get to the bottom of it and interview everybody in order to determine if there was more than one person who perhaps exercised bad judgment.
Well, sure. My question is, why don't you relieve everybody of duty who made bad judgment? So yeah, you're right. I am zeroing in on somebody. I'm trying to find somebody who's accountable here.
And
you're telling me that the person who made the decision not to include this in the perimeter has not been relieved of duty. What about the person who's in charge of the interoperability of radio frequencies between local law enforcement and Secret Service? Has that person been relieved of duty?
No, Senator, because interoperability is a challenge, is a greater challenge than.
Revolutionary salute, soldier. Revolutionary salute to Toolbox Evolution for the $5 donation to the war chest. Revolution is real life, and I absolutely appreciate the love. Queen, salute.
And just one person. On that day, we had a counterpart system. It failed.
As the person who made the decision to send Donald Trump onto stage, knowing that you had a security situation, has that person been relieved of duty?
No, sir, they haven't.
Has the person who decided not to pull the former president off of stage when you knew that, in your words, the locals were working a serious security situation, has that person been relieved of duty?
No, sir. Again, I refer you back to my original answer that we are investigating this through a mission assurance. And as opposed to zeroing in on one,
what more do you need to investigate to know
exactly what the
more do you
decision-making
need to
process
investigate
was?
to know that there were critical enough failures that some individuals ought to be held accountable? I mean, what more do you need to know?
What I need to know is exactly what happened, and I need my investigators to do their job. And I cannot.
A lot of people didn't do their
I cannot
jobs.
put my thumb on the scale. Otherwise,
what do you mean put your thumb on the scale?
You're asking me, Senator, to completely make a rush to judgment about somebody failing. I acknowledge this was a failure of the
Is it
Secret
not
Service.
prima facie that somebody has failed? A former president was shot.
Sir, this could have been our Texas school book depository. I have lost sleep over that for the last 17 days, just like you
Fire
have.
somebody to
And I will
hold them
tell you, Senator,
accountable.
I will tell you, Senator, that I will not rush to judgment, that people will be held accountable, and I will do so with integrity and not rush to judgment and put people
I can't believe
unfairly
that you
persecuted.
are unfairly persecuted.
Unfairly,
We've got people
sir.
who are
We
dead.
have to be able to have a proper investigation into this, Senator.
You said earlier that you've got to make sure that your protocols are followed, and unless there's a protocol violation, people wouldn't be disciplined. I would just say to you, I don't really care that much about your protocols. I think if your protocols don't provide for the fact that when a former president is shot, when an American is killed, when other rally goers, innocent people who just showed up on the day, when they are shot at and critically wounded, if that isn't a protocol violation prima facie, you should revise your protocols.
Senator, I think this is where you and I agree. This was a failure, and we will get to the bottom of it.
Well, I hope you're going to do something about it. Let me ask you something else. The Real Clear Politics reports this morning that you were directly involved in denying additional security resources and personnel, including counter snipers, not just to this event, but over the last 2 years, that President Trump's team repeatedly asked for these additional resources, and you personally were involved in denying them. Is that true?
Senator, as I stated earlier, that is not true.
So you never denied any resources to former President Trump's team?
No, not me. No, sir.
And
Not
you
personally.
weren't involved in any of that? You
No,
were never
sir, I
involved
was
in the
not.
decision making?
No, sir, I was not.
Let me ask you just one or two other things here quickly. Well, whistleblowers tell me that, in fact, law enforcement were stationed to be on that roof and that law enforcement abandoned their post because it was too hot. Is that accurate?
Senator, I have heard that as well. Again, they posted up inside. And I think moving forward, as I said earlier, we're going to ensure that state and local counter snipers are on roofs.
But do you know if someone was supposed to be on the roof? Do you know if someone was in fact? That's what the whistleblowers tells me. That may or may not be accurate. Do you know that to be the fact? Was somebody posted to the roof, local law enforcement or whomever?
I do not know that to be a fact.
Well, can I ask you why you don't know that?
How you don't know if you assigned it to them or
Again,
not?
Senator, we are looking at this,
Another
and
lot of-
they should have been on that roof. And the fact that they were in the building is something that I'm still trying to understand.
I just want to express my frustration, Director, that 17 days or whatever
No,
it's
he's
been,
trying to understand.
that whistleblowers are telling us more than you are, and you don't know, you haven't ascertained if there was supposed to be law enforcement on the roof. That seems like a pretty basic fact. I'm also told that local law enforcement suppliers offered the Secret Service drones, and you declined them. Is that true?
So, Senator, one, I've been very transparent and forthcoming.
Your agency has not been transparent and forthcoming, so please, let's not go there.
I have been forthcoming, sir.
You've been, that remains to be seen. You've been on the job a few days. So far, you've fired nobody. Now, the drones.
Thank you,
Were
sir.
you offered drones?
Senator
So there
Holloway.
was an offer to fly a drone on that day.
And why did you deny it?
Again, I think the ability of local law enforcement to provide an asset, we probably should have taken them up on it if it was offered.
Very simply, the first people to the van, before they ran the serial number on the gun, on Crook's gun, supposedly, the first people to the van was the township police, the Butler Township Police. And that's who leaked the van serial number. The van serial number, talk to the 10 or 12 outlets that all simultaneously got URIC wrong. It's from the van serial number. It's from the van serial number. And the serial number from the gun is how they got to Crooks. That was the correction. And so Roger Stone, and all I did was follow up on everyone reporting URIC, him leaving supposedly his residence on July 12th, the day before, the 19 different metadata locations with Crooks. That's how, with the Allegheny Gun Club, Crooks's home, Crooks's lacrosse field, Crooks's place of business, 6 different places around Clarendon for the secret DHS locations. I mean, it was lining up. Plus the Washington, D.C. headquarters visit to the Secret Service. We got to kind of remember that. But the original false reporting, or where everybody got thrown the curveball, was the serial number, the license plate number from the white van. That's why they want to suppress the white van. That's why they want to suppress the white van.
Make no mistake about it, we are being ran through a state of confusion that I have never seen before in all my 38 years on this planet. Every event that has happened these past few weeks, nothing makes sense. Before we do begin this video, I do want to ask if you can please like, comment, and share this video, as YouTube is heavily monitoring this channel and other channels talking about this topic. So the more likes we give, the more comments we make, will help balance against what YouTube is deleting. Also, if you like this video, if you like this channel, please do subscribe as well. From what happened at Trump's rally on July 13th to the most recent 2024 games controversy, to everything in between, the United States election, CrowdStrike, the computers glitching everywhere, every answer we are given contradicts with answers that are coming out. And where does that leave us? That leaves us confused. Then on top of everything else, on top of all these very bizarre events that are leaving us confused, we have the word weird being constantly fed to us. News, media, politicians, social media, we are constantly seeing the word weird. So why are they trying to control that word? What is going to happen in the future that we are going to say that's weird, that's strange, and that they are already controlling this word? Think about how crazy that sounds. Think about everything that has gone down in these past few weeks, all these bizarre events taking place. And on top of everything else, you are no longer allowed to use the word weird. And bizarre, strange, all fits into that category. You're not allowed to use these words to describe these events, or now you're given the label of a liberal, a Democrat, because the liberal politicians, news, media, and so forth have now secured the word. That is the most mind-blowing thing to me right now that's going on, that they are playing all these strange events, and on top of that, they stopped you from saying the word weird, because if you do, you're now going to fall into politics. And what you're talking about, the topic will change. Oh, you're using the word weird because you hate Trump. You hate his vice president. Oh, you just agree with Kamala Harris, and so forth. Something big is around the corner. Something huge is around the corner that is going to play into our confusion. It has to be. But enough of me rambling on about these different topics. That's not what you're here for. You are here for what you've read in the title, Trump's rally. Now, one other thing that still has left me confused is the fact that we have not heard from Maxwell Yerrick. Where is Maxwell Yerrick? Why has Maxwell Yerrick not spoken out yet about his involvement when it comes to July 13th? That is what's absolutely crazy to me. Maxwell Yerrick's name is blazing on social media, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and I'm sure Facebook, Instagram, and other places. Nobody, pretty much nobody, is buying the fact that it was Thomas Matthew Crooks on the roof. Some people are, but a lot of people are not. People believe that it was Maxwell Yerrick on the roof and that Maxwell Yerrick is deceased. One other things that I'm hearing is that Maxwell Yerrick has not come out and give a statement. He's deleted his social media because he's afraid of getting harassed and that he's being harassed. But that makes no sense whatsoever, because people believe that Maxwell Yerrick has passed away. This reminds me of the whole Tiffany Dover situation, the nurse who got the C-19 jab on live TV. She passed out, she fainted, and we were not allowed to talk about it because she was being harassed. Well, people thought she passed away. People thought she was no longer around, that she was deceased. So who's harassing Tiffany Dover? The theory is that Tiffany Dover passed away from the C-19 jab. So who is harassing a dead woman?
Tiffany Dover wants the world to know one thing.
My message is simple. It is that I am alive. I'm well. That's it. I hope they believe it.
They are the massive online community of conspiracy theorists who've been convinced she's dead.
Just like with Maxwell Yerrick, where people are saying he's in hiding because he's being harassed. Well, if he comes out and says, I'm hiding because I'm being harassed, well, that proves you are not there on the roof. That proves you had no involvement with July 13th because you're still alive. You're not the deceased man on the roof. That is the whole thing. That is where people are confused. They are saying the man lying prone on the roof and the man in the photos where he has a bullet wound all look like Maxwell Yerrick. So if Maxwell Yerrick comes out and says, I'm still alive, then that would debunk our confusion. That would completely erase our confusion. What makes things even worse is that Maxwell Yerrick had a social media presence. He had a Facebook under Maxwell, and someone recorded in real time his Facebook being deleted. Maxwell Yerrick's Facebook being scrubbed only hurts. It does not help whatsoever. He did not have to upload a video of himself. He did not have to upload a photo of himself. All he had to do was make a post saying, I'm still alive. That was not me on the roof. That's it. Now, I may not have bought it. Many people may not have bought it, but it definitely would not have hurt. It would have given some more ammunition to push back the claim that it was Maxwell Yerrick on the roof. We have to ask ourselves, and I've asked myself this before as well, where did the name Maxwell Yerrick even pop up in the first place when it pertains to what took place on July 13th? We first heard the name Maxwell Yerrick from Roger Stone. Roger Stone said he had credible sources that told him it was Maxwell Yerrick on the roof. Then InfoWars took what Roger Stone said and ran with it. But who are these credible sources? Well, it's not hard to believe that those credible sources come from the city of Butler, and we have to go back to the white van. It's not hard to believe the white van with the Arizona license plates, those license plates were run through the system, and it got a hit back, and more than likely that hit back went back to Roger Yerrick. And all one has to do is Google Roger Yerrick's name, and they'll see his obituary. And you will see Maxwell Yerrick's name. Well, you Google Maxwell Yerrick's name, and you will find the connection between Maxwell Yerrick and Trump. That Maxwell Yerrick has a history of assaults, being arrested at Trump's rally for assault. The photo of the man lying deceased on the roof with the bullet wound has the exact same neck mole as Maxwell Yerrick. I strongly believe that is how they got that connection to Maxwell Yerrick, by running those Arizona license plates, and they messed up when they said that the DNA test came back that it was Matthew Crooks on the roof when it was actually Maxwell Yerrick, and they can't go back. That is why you are no longer hearing about the DNA test. You are now hearing that they took Thomas Crooks' gun, they ran the serial number, and it came back to Thomas Matthew Crooks. Well, what about the DNA that you ran? You said he had no identification on him, so you ran his DNA through the system, and instantly you got a hit back to Thomas Matthew Crooks. You mean to tell me media organizations like TMZ, who have also been heavily reporting about what took place on July 13th, cannot find Maxwell Yerrick to give a statement, even though TMZ always reports about things that are being heavily talked about on social media? And a lot of people, like I said, Maxwell Yerrick's name is on fire as being the person who is deceased on the roof, and TMZ cannot find Maxwell Yerrick to give a statement. That would be big if they did. I know they see the name Maxwell Yerrick popping up everywhere, and TMZ is always the first to find anybody and everybody. They are always the first on the scene when someone passes away. They even found the first footage of Tiffany Gomas hopping back on a plane, and they interviewed Tiffany Gomas. So then I hear, well, if it was Maxwell Yerrick on the roof, if it was Maxwell Yerrick to take the bullet, then where is Thomas Matthew Crooks? Why is Thomas Matthew Crooks not speaking out? And who really knows? Who really knows if Thomas Matthew Crooks is even real? He may be an AI person for all we know. You do not know. Now, I'm not saying he's AI. I know some people take it and run with it, but that's one of the theories that's being floated around. He could have changed his gender. He could have changed his identity. He could be disposed of. He's no longer of any use. His name can't be used in the future. maybe they disposed of him. Where is Thomas Matthew Crooks right now? We don't know. But what we do know is that you'll never hear from Thomas Matthew Crooks again. And if you do, like I said, he will change his identity altogether. He will be a brand new person if he is still alive. But the confusing part is why we have not heard from Maxwell Yerrick. So again, the more we ask questions, the more we are led to being confused and staying in the state of confusion. Because again, nothing makes sense. It did not make sense from day one when we had this Twitter troll, or supposedly this Twitter troll named Jew Gazing, come out and say he is Thomas Matthew Crooks. He hates Trump. He hates Republicans. And that he even said his name was Thomas Matthew Crooks, but you got the wrong guy. So that was day one confusion that was laid upon us. We even had news and media running articles that this was Thomas Matthew Crooks because he looked like the Thomas Matthew Crooks in the photo that was given to us by news and media. Then we have these 2024 games controversy of this boxer who they are saying is a female, was born a female, but they were tested to have XY chromosomes. So there's even more confusion laid on the public because there are still people in the public that believe your chromosomes dictate your gender, whether you are a male or a female. So they're going to come out and say, well, the boxer was born a female, but they had these certain chromosomes that are linked to men. Even though the boxer has not come out and given an official statement yet as to why they tested positive for the XY chromosomes, we have people giving a statement for them. And if you are to question why they allowed a person with XY chromosomes, a man with XY chromosomes, to compete in female boxing, you are the bad guy. Has any woman with XX chromosomes, born a female with XX chromosomes, ever compete in male professional boxing? Has a woman with XX chromosomes fought Mike Tyson, fought Roy Jones, and so forth? Why is it always the other way around? We are just being ran through the ringer these past few weeks. We always have been, but it has really ramped up these past few weeks. And on top of everything, they control the word weird. It is just getting crazier and crazier and crazier and very wacky. But in any case, thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe.
Here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, August 1st, 2024. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer is with us. Tony, what a pleasure, my dear friend. Welcome back to the show. Thank you for taking the time to join us. We have a lot to talk about. A lot has happened since you and I were together last. I mainly want to dwell on Russia, but before we get to Russia, the effect of the war on it, the likely and coming demise of Kyiv. What is your take 2.5 weeks after the attempted assassination? What is your take on the assassination? Was it just this scrawny 20-year-old kid, or were others complicit in this?
The kid was a patsy. The kid has been lied about and his history manipulated. The Gab account he supposedly had, what was brought up by the acting director of the Secret Service, I think, is it day before yesterday, and it's been mischaracterized. They basically the Secret Service tried to make him into a Trump supporter, and say that he was some Trump person, and yet it's not. It's very clear he wasn't. If you look at the actual content of the account, so that's first thing. Like, okay, there's something wrong here. Secondly, just the way he's portrayed as kind of this kid who nobody liked him, is like apparently he was a bully. And it's just interesting, the different narratives which are not quite syncing up, just him. So then just set him aside. There's now video of him moving around. And I'm going to say this, and it's going to be controversial. They wanted him to be seen. The reason they allowed him to kind of move around, Judge, is because they wanted all of this evidence, so-called evidence, to be available after the fact. That's why you do that. I was just at the Chesapeake, Virginia event 3 weeks ago tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. Yeah, so time flies. And I'm a member of Law Enforcement Virginia, and I still had to go through multiple layers of security to get to where I needed to be next to the president on when he was on stage. And I can tell you for a fact, Judge, nobody was being allowed to wander around uncontrolled. People were channelized, they were searched, they were monitored as they were moving. Nobody could just wander around the background. And you had drones and helicopters both flying over constantly. So in this case, apparently this kid with a rangefinder and obvious alerting behavior, which is what I think you're familiar with regarding what law enforcement generally looks at when they question someone or see someone on the street, alerting behavior. This kid was alerting behavior all the time.
What is the bottom line here? That there were elements in law enforcement, state, local, or federal, who wanted him to kill the former president?
I'm saying it on a record. Absolutely. There's no way, Judge, you allow this kid with alerting behavior to wander around in an uncontrolled area. It's not done. It was done here because there was something that they all knew about it. And another thing I'm going to say, which I think maybe if the audience thinks about it, they'll understand what I'm saying. There was a 48-hour kind of dead zone where nobody was really talking about this. Nobody really knew what to say. The reason
before or after the shooting?
After the shooting, before they could make any official statements, there was like a 48-hour period that after the shooting, nobody really knew what to say. The reason is because the leadership of the Biden administration, they didn't know what to say because they had anticipated Trump being dead. They really counted on Trump being dead. So they had already, I think, prepared the narrative. And look what they did in the hearings, Judge. The Democrats were already prepared to go after the AR-15. They wanted this to be a threefer. This was not just a twofer. This was a threefer. They wanted Trump dead in a very public way. They wanted his head to explode on stage. I'm sorry I have to be that blunt about it, but that's what they wanted. They wanted an AR to be used because the AR is their boogeyman. They wanted to have the AR be the weapon that killed Trump so then they could go after gun control and this. And third, and probably most importantly, to send a message that no one should ever dare challenge the political leviathan of the deep state and the Democrat Party. It was meant to do kind of a three things. So that's what I thought.
But what you're suggesting is a conspiracy so vast. Wouldn't someone have spilled the beans by now and say, here's what I overheard my boss is talking about, and I have to come forward with it?
So you have to understand how these things are done. These things are done where people are quietly recruited. They're permitted to have political beliefs which are in complete sync with the Democrat Party and the ruling class, and they just are kind of suggested on what they should do and not do. And that's why I can't say which agency I suspect was completely involved, but it wasn't a federal agency who was completely involved in helping facilitate this. You're not going to find this through federal FOIAs. That's my point is. Right. Judge, these people have done this before. This is not the first time. My friend and your friend, you know Matt Ho, right?
Yes.
Matt and I have talked about this. Matt correctly identified in our previous discussions that this is not the first time that we've seen this rodeo play out. There have been events such as the RFK assassination, the JFK assassination, MLK. These things were conspiracies. They did happen, and they were all portrayed as lone wolves or lone gunmen. So, you know, the folks who did this have done an excellent job of looking at the past and figuring out how to apply those successful formats to the present. And yeah, I think we're going to come to find there was a very large conspiracy that a lot of folks were involved in. And
forgive the language, but you'll know what I mean, and the audience will know, is the public pissing contest between local Pennsylvania police and Secret Service a charade?
It is. So, you're kind of going where I don't want to talk I think there's some folks there.
All right, well, you
that-
go as far as you can
I
without
think
saying something you shouldn't say.
everything that happened and everything that is clandestine is in plain sight. I know this is hard to explain. The best things I did as an operative were always hidden in plain sight. It looked incidental to everything else going on, and we pulled off some amazing. That's the irony of being a clandestine guy. You can't talk about your best operations, but I'll say this: we have seen the real shooters in the media. They have been hidden in plain sight. There's a reason, Judge, that right after the attempt, people were up on that rooftop contaminating the crime scene. Think about this. You're a judge. You've seen all sorts of law enforcement shenanigans.
Oh, man.
Who contaminates a crime scene of this magnitude? Well, the people who contaminated the crime scene had a reason to contaminate the crime scene. And that's why you see all these deviations. You see things which would never happen in other circumstance, but it's all done in front of the camera. It's all done concealing the actual clandestine events within the terms of what is normally seen. It's all hidden in plain sight.
Do you think since this failed that they will try again?
No doubt. And I several of us who are familiar with security have made strong recommendations to the president's team on what they should do to protect President Trump, because we all believe, and this is my colleague Blaine Holt, General Holt, folks who I've served with my entire career, we are all very concerned and believe that there are adequate and qualified people who would have a complete commitment to protecting him.
Right.
And unfortunately, the Secret Service does not have that commitment, which is obvious at this point.
Okay. I want you to watch this clip from Ronald Rowe, who's the acting director. It's pretty bellicose. It's about a minute and a half long, but I want you to comment on it, and then we'll get on to the Russia stuff. Cut number 6, Chris.
This is from the second floor of the AGR building. This point of view is the point of view where the counter sniper team locally was posted. The gold arrow indicates where the shooter fired from. Looking left. Why was the assailant not seen? When we were told that building was going to be covered, this view is a reenactment by one of my agents. Laying flat. There was a 5-inch rise on the middle of that roof. The assailant would have had to present his bore over that to get his shot off. The view underneath reflects the perspective that he would have had. Again, I call your attention back to the first exhibit if they'd have looked left. This is what our counter sniper team saw. These were discussions that were had between the Pittsburgh field office, the local counterparts, and everyone supporting that visit that day. And that's why when I laid in that position, I could not, and I will not, and I cannot understand why there was not better coverage, or at least somebody looking at that roof line when that's where they were posted.
Credible or not?
He's lying. Everything he said was known before the shot was taken, and I don't want to be. I need to be careful here. The very elements he's outlining were known by the people who shot at Trump. That is to say, that he's presenting essentially their operations plan for concealing this. Think about it. He's laying out how, oh yeah, we couldn't see him, this, that, and the other, but we still, he's telling you how they did it, Judge. He's taking and switching around the what they had done, because they knew this would come up, and so they've had to conceal everything within the context of how they would commit themselves to protecting the president. That's what I'm telling you. It's all hidden in plain sight. You just have to start peeling off the layers to figure out that what they're saying is essentially what they intended to do. This was not accidental. This was not random. This was not incompetence. And he's lying.
The projectile that hit Trump's ear, was it fired by Crooks or by somebody else?
So I refer back to the ballistic record, the audio ballistic record. Bang, bang, bang. Those were three very precise shots. One hit Trump. The first one hit Trump. The other ones came very close and hit other folks. Judge, I've had to take hard shots with a rifle. And even in best circumstance, when you're confident, and by the way, there's ample video showing people were yelling at this kid. This kid was under pressure. So he's supposed to have just taken a deep breath and fired off three precise rounds, one of which could have been the kill shot. And then there's a video where it's supposed to capture him at the very moment the first shot is shot, and it looks like he didn't shoot, because there's a certain, even if you shoot with it, I've got an AR, but I don't want to get you in trouble. I don't want to bring it up because I've had to redo this for several interviews.
Yeah, I understood.
There's still a bit of a recoil, and you can see it, and you can see the side of his face.
Right.
So I'm just saying that nothing is matched. So I think the first three shots were taken by a professional. I think the wind had an effect to move that bullet just a little bit to the president's right, which helped, move it off of his ear, moved it to his right. About a 5 to 7 mile an hour breeze, which apparently and then after the first three rounds, which were very, very, accurately aimed, very tight, then you had the bang, 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 bang. And I think those were fired by Crooks potentially, because I think he figured out something's wrong, and those were just kind of fired off.
Does the government know who fired the shot that hit Trump's ear?
Oh yeah. They know. They know.
Well, you're talking about attempted murder, and you're talking about conspiracy to commit murder. I mean, these are among the most serious crimes in the American lexicon. All right. Fascinating conversation, Tony, but I have so many other things to get to with you. The war in Ukraine. Is this transforming Russia in a way to make it more economically prosperous and unified behind President Putin?
So the only economic prosperity that's being seen right now, besides Zelensky getting rich, are the Russians. Let me pull up my stats, because I've been answering questions about this over the last few days. So Russia has been moved by the World Bank judge into a high income bracket. That is to say that their economic growth, I can't find my notes now, but they're around here somewhere. The Russians have been moved into a high income growth category. Basically, they've got like 11% growth overall in some sectors, not all sectors, but a lot. And they've pretty much overcome the sanctions. Here it is. 11.2. Their people. They're basically 11.2% according to the World Bank growth. That's success. Putin has overcome all sanctions. They planned for them. They were never going to work, and they failed. And the only people who have actually suffered from sanctions is Germany and the Europeans. So at this point, there's no incentive for the Russians to change the trajectory of their activities. And plus, they just did this large prisoner swap. If I were Zelensky right now, I'd be worrying about the terms of that deal, because I think the reason this swap happened is because I think the West is starting to recognize there's no there with Ukraine. And so I think there's real negotiations now ongoing. I think you're going to see a evaluation of the Istanbul agreement. I think a lot of folks who are practical are looking at an Istanbul Plus type agreement down the road. And I don't know if even the Biden administration has the strength to continue the charade that the Ukraine is doing.
Let me take a step back, Tony, and see if I understand you.
Yeah.
As we speak, the United States government and the Russian government is announcing a massive prisoner swap
Right.
We don't know who's in it, except we do know that Evan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal, as to whom we are told there is ample evidence of guilt, is among them. And Paul Whelan, who's been held by the Russians for many years, I don't know the level of guilt, but I know he's been held for a long time, is also among them. You are of the view that this exchange, because of the large number of people involved, is an indication of Western cooperation with Russia and Western recognition that Ukraine cannot resist the Russian military. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, I absolutely. So the collective West has been unwilling to negotiate in any substantial terms with Russia because they wanted to have negotiations from a position of strength, and the strength they were seeking was victory in Ukraine. They believed their own, press about, oh, we're doing well. The Ukrainians are on the march. The Russians are all basically. I can't even remember what General Hodges talks about this all the time, and the words he uses are obtuse. They're just like not even remotely accurate. But he was saying the Russians have suffered great, defeats. And I'm not saying the Russians haven't lost on the battlefield at times. I'm saying the overall trajectory of things, the Russians are doing very well, and there's no incentive for the Russians to change their what they're doing. I think the West has now recognized that very fact. Things that we've been talking about for the past year, Judge, I think those in leadership positions are finally accepting. And the Jake Sullivans, the Tony Blinkens, the Lloyd Austins all have been acting out of a sense of sentiment. The sentiment is, we want Ukraine to win. Okay, but it's not going to happen. So I think that sentiment, that feeling that we're going to help Ukraine win is kind of fading. They know it's not going to happen.
Here's
Go ahead.
A
I'm sorry.
statement from a retired British colonel, British Army, Philip Ingram, who says that Russia is losing. I think the statement's absurd, and all of your colleagues on this show have mocked it, but I want you to hear it. Cut number 11.
Sure.
It's costing them over 1,000 troops a day. In the past 24 hours, the Russians have lost over 1,300 troops. They've lost over 28 artillery systems. They've lost over 12 tanks, and they're losing those sorts of numbers on a daily basis. And that is, frankly, unsustainable, no matter how big your military force is, no matter how capable it is.
What do you think? I mean,
well, I'm curious about what MBE stands for. Does that stand for monstrously big ego at the end of his name? Because that's what this is.
I think it's some affiliation with a British intel group. I'm not sure.
Anyway, well, I'd go with my assessment of what it means, and it's nonsense. Again, right now, Judge, the World Bank has accurately. World Bank has nothing to do with either side. They're just saying this is what the economic reality is, and then you combine it with the advances, the slow but steady advances on the battlefield. The Russians are not losing. They're gaining ground. They are in a position of strength. And oh, by the way, I guess as of today or sometime within this week, the F-16s all show up. The F-16s. Many of the folks in the West now have recognized the F-16s being introduced to the battle mean absolutely nothing. It's always been a MacGuffin. It was never going to be something that actually shifted or changed the trajectory of the war. So I get fed up with people who supposedly are intelligence officers who are, all know it all. He's lying. That colonel is either lying or stupid. I don't know which it is. But I'm just telling you that I try my best to assess things as they are, not what I want them to be. And no matter how I feel about either side, Ukraine is losing, Russia's winning, and it's just a matter of time before Ukraine collapses within the current trajectory of things.
What do you think will happen? I'm switching gears now. If Israel gets into a major fight with Hezbollah and Iran backs Hezbollah and Iran comes under a major assault from Israel, will Russia sit still?
No, I think the Russians have already voted with Tehran. I think they are with Tehran. With that said, the Russians are fairly limited on what they can do directly. I think it's much more likely that you would see Turkey do something. Turkey's actually threatened to do something against the Israelis. Erdogan, who is a member of NATO, I might add, has made bellicose comments and rather aggressive uses of the English language to say that he feels that he must do something.
Isn't he just a blowhard? He's been saying this for a year.
Blowhards tend to get themselves in trouble, and I think this is a situation where he may get himself in trouble because he said he wants to do something. He may well try it. I don't know. Remember, Erdogan did leave the back door open for ISIS to become a regional threat that required immense military action. So Erdogan is playing a game that only Erdogan thinks he can benefit from. So at this point, I don't know, but Russia would, I think, try to help Tehran if push comes to shove.
Now I'm going to ask you a question that I know you want me to ask you, even though we have not talked about it ahead of time. Did Joe Biden jump or was he pushed?
He was pushed. So come on, you've met Joe Biden. I've met Joe Biden. Joe Biden is he would never have left the White House or left being a candidate without someone threatening him. He had to be heavily threatened. I think that I've seen credible reporting from Cy Hirsch. I think Cy is correct that basically Obama went to him and said, either you take the gracious way out and drop out, or else we're going to 25th Amendment you. I think he was threatened with a coup. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have done the coup. I think the 25th Amendment is adequate and justified. But you have to understand, the left, the folks in the current left never play. I know people who are traditional liberals, Judge, who I love and get along. Matt Ho is I consider a traditional liberal. These other folks are progressives who are essentially just one step away from Stalin. And this was a Stalin-like move where the party wouldn't just do the right thing and use the 25th Amendment to remove him. No, that would have damaged the brand. What they've done, I think, is worse. They've actually taken someone, pushed him out, who actually got 14 million votes as their candidate for president. And now it's like, oh yeah, never mind. I'm just going to get out and I'm going to let Kamala do it. Kamala Harris, who did not receive one vote of support in the primary, and she in 2020 didn't even make it to the final high. She was not even on the stage of any substance regarding the percentage of support she had then. So I think this is a coup d'etat that we're watching in real time.
Tony Shaffer, always a pleasure, my friend, whether we're talking politics, law enforcement, ballistics, or Russia. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Hello, Garland Nixon here. And of course, the neocons are doing what they are best at, and that's just botch everything up. Let's talk. I have been, I think, temporarily demonetized by YouTube. They said, I have a strike. You're going to love this. They said I have some kind of a strike. So I am demonetized. It said I have to go do some little training thing. But here's the interesting thing. They said, you have a strike, you're being demonetized. And they showed me the video that they removed. It was 2 years old. So apparently 2 years, it took them 2 years to figure out that this was some terrible transgression that I made against humanity. And for that, I have to be temporarily demonetized. So it is what it is. If anybody wants to donate, certainly, we've got ways to do that. We got Patreon, buy me a coffee, things of that nature. Certainly, that's appreciated. All right, let's get going. And I got to get ready to get moving to transition completely out of YouTube anyway. So it's just that is the motivation I needed to do to kind of get to the point where I'm going on YouTube, doing what they call the YouTube hack, where you go on YouTube and you tell people, hey, everybody, I'm on Rockfin and Rumble. Go, follow me there. I'm out, right? But at any rate, so I'm not there yet, but that's the direction of things. So let's talk. What's happening right now? Interesting. As we get to the end of the Biden administration, the Kamala Harris, or as I will call it now, the Blinken-Sullivan administration, they're trying to push Kamala Harris. What's interesting about that is that it's all, she's a woman of color, she's blah, 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 right? She's a woman of color. It's all about identity politics. Why? Because they botched everything up. They got to tell us that the economy's wonderful. Why? Because the economy's terrible. And it's not wonderful. So that's why, let me try to move this thing a little more like that, whatever the hell. It's the economy's terrible, so they have to tell us it's wonderful. You know what it's kind of like? If this is what the neocons do. The Ukrainians are getting smashed to pieces. So what do they say? The Ukrainians are just about to win. If we just gave them a little bit more, no matter what goes bad, they simply go with the narrative. So the economy's doing great according to them. Foreign policy's never been better. We've got an all-star blue ribbon foreign policy team, and everybody should be happy. So go out and vote for Kamala Harris, not because the policy's been so wonderful. Let's just do that because she's a woman of color, of gender, of whatever the hell. There you go. That's what you got to vote for. Yeah, no chance of that. I don't. We'll see what happens. I don't trust the system whatsoever, but we'll see what happens. I don't see in a fair fight where anybody, much less Kamala Harris, anybody representing the Biden administration would have much of a chance after the debacle after debacle. But let's continue. We'll start with Venezuela, since a lot of people aren't covering that, or excuse me, a lot of people are covering that, but a lot of people are doing still on Middle East, justifiably so. Let's start with Venezuela. What happened? The usual happened. What happens every time they have an election, and that is the people vote for the person that they choose. Look, in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez is a saint, the political equivalent of a saint, and Nicolas Maduro was his right-hand man, so he can do no wrong. He's always going to win. I mean, that's like when FDR, you know what I mean? If FDR had a right-hand man who was very much like FDR, you'd have had the same kind of thing, right? You had a beloved leader. I'll put it like this: right now in Russia, if Vladimir Putin was to step aside and he was to have this second in command and say, hey, put the blessing on him, this is my guy, trust me, he'd win. A popular leader who has a person who is viewed as their kind of almost alter ego, shall we say, who represents them symbolically and most likely via policy, the people are going to stick with that. And so the idea, the whole a false premise narrative that the economy in Venezuela has gone bad because of Nicolas Maduro. Well, the people of Venezuela know it's a lie, and they know that U.S. Sanctions reduce the oil intake, the oil finances coming in Venezuela by 99%. So what I'm going to do is, imagine this: I cut your salary by 99%, and then I say you're poor because you're mismanaging your money. Well, that doesn't make much sense, does it? It's pretty absurd, right? But people who want to believe capitalism is great, socialism is terrible, well, they'll just go right along with that. And of course, the U.S. empire making the argument that, hey, we're the best ever and we're great. What we do is wonderful. And believe us, Juan Guaido's the president, et cetera, et cetera. Those kind of people are just pushing that narrative. But the people of Venezuela ain't buying it. They know U.S. imperialism when they see it. They know neocons when they see them. And they know good and well that if the U.S. gets its stinking mitts on Venezuela's oil, that it's going to steal their natural resources, and the people are going to be facing dire poverty and a extremist a government. But first of all, if you have any doubt that the U.S. is able to put a puppet government in place in your country, if you have any doubt what that country's going to be, what that government's going to look like, one need only look at Ukraine and Israel. So if the U.S. has a puppet government, they're going to be some form of extremist, Naziist, fascist government. That's what you're going to get. If the U.S. puts a government in, they're going to be fascist. Venezuela knows that. They don't want a fascist government. So the answer is no, 9 yet, right? Not happening. So now the U.S. is pissed, and they tried the usual game there. Oh, we're going to have, the game. riots and protests, right? Oh my gosh, the good people of Venezuela are standing up against the guy who won a fair and honest election. And therefore, they're in the streets. So what do you get? There's an election. Somebody wins fair and square. Next thing you know, the extremists that are funded and financed and generally armed by the U.S. government are in the streets in Venezuela trying to raise heck. The problem is it ain't going to do any good. Not going to happen. The people of Venezuela know what time it is. I've been there, talked to them. Sorry, no luck, neocons. You're going to lose there every single time, just like Nicaragua, just like Cuba. Here's what you've seen. Those countries are willing to fight. What you've got now is countries who are willing to fight for their freedom. The U.S. now, if they're going to go around the world and they're going to take over a country, the days when they could get a bunch of schleps together and march around the streets and carry tiki torches or some such fascist crap like that, take over the country and then go steal those natural resources, those days are over for two reasons. Reason one, these governments are hip to it. So before they even had their election, they know what's coming. We know what's coming. Of course they know what's coming. Hey, what's going to happen after election? U.S.-sponsored NGOs are then going to get a bunch of fascist puppets in the street to try to have violent protests, burn things down, kill people, do stuff like that, overthrow the government. So here's what they know. After we have our election, we got to ride out the usual U.S. color revolution game plan, and then we'll move on. I mean, it's almost like part of the game. You know what I mean? Well, first I got to do this. What after that? Well, then we got to do that. Then we can move on, right? Like someone who has a workout. Well, first I do my workout. What do you? And Saturdays, me and my buddy, we do this major workout, and we have a pattern, right? We come in. We get there at 9 into the gym. We gripe, we grumble. Oh God, not again. Oh, this is terrible. Oh, every bone in my body hurts. Right? You do that stuff. You go through your workout. Oh, this is a living hell. God, take me now. I don't want to live. Right? Okay, so you go through that. Right? Afterwards, we go to Smoothie King, and I get a recovery smoothie, which is either strawberry banana or pineapple, and he gets whatever the hell he gets. That's our pattern. We know it, go through it every week. I'm accustomed to it. Do I gripe? Do I grumble? All that. Yeah, but that's what I do on Saturday mornings. Ain't changing, right? I understand the good, the bad, and the ugly, but that's what my Saturday morning is going to look like between like 9 and 11:30. Okay. Well, now country, whether it's Georgia, whoever the hell, Iran, they understand their pattern. What happens? Well, first we're going to set up our elections and the U.S. is going to try to get their puppet in. And they're going to say it's not going to, well, we're going to do terrible things and they got to protect us from our citizens from us, right? That's what the government knows. Then we're going to do our elections and the U.S. government's going to say, yeah, there's all kind of unthinkable things going on, underhanded things going on during the election. And then afterward, the U.S.'s NGOs are going to put together a bunch of puppets into the street and they're going to raise hell, burn some things down. Maybe a few lives will be lost. And then we can move on, right? Because that crap don't work no more. Doesn't work anymore. They do that and then they can move on. That's what it is. It's almost like a formality now for governments. The stupid idiots that are running this country still, they're part of the formality. They're like, hey, what are you going to do? I got an idea. You're not going to believe this. This is unique. What? After country X has their election and the guy that we hate, who the citizens just happen to like, wins the election, we will then, check this out, I know you're going to be ready for this one. We're going to finance crazy fascists, put them on the street, and we'll have a color revolution. And all of them look together and like, yeah. And one guy, of course, in the back of the room goes, hey, guys, we've been trying that. It ain't been working well lately. Perhaps we could try another. They're like, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. I think you're a Putin lover. Hey, we got a Putin lover in the room. Off with his head, right? That's the way they do things. And so it's almost like a dance, right? It's almost like a dance. Everybody knows their part. Everybody knows their steps. We have an election. Neocons come in, a color revolution attempt. The color revolution attempt flops, and we go on with our lives. I think that Venezuela is moving closer and closer to being a part of BRICS. One of the things that I think could potentially happen that is aligned with this, And believe it or not, I'm gonna align something. What's going on in the Middle East, I think, is that as the war spreads, the time will come, my dear and fluffy friends, when Americans get something that they haven't gotten in the past. And that is feeling the pain. I mean, they have in a more of an abstract way, in more of a distant way, and a more of a way that they couldn't tie it directly to foreign policy. For instance, spending all of the money in the Vietnam War created an environment where we got stagflation, we got economic problems in the 70s, and a lot of it was we had to come off the gold standard. A lot of that, but for the most part, was because of the major spending in the Vietnam War. So the people felt the pain, but they couldn't really connect it. So we've had instance after instance where people felt the pain, but it wasn't right in front of their face of the U.S. foreign policy, right? And now the U.S. want the people, once again, inflation, all of this stuff. This is all a result of U.S. foreign policy and massive war spending, but the people can't directly connect it. Okay, so Americans haven't pushed back on foreign policy because they really haven't been able to put those two things right together. I think what we're looking at now is that as the war spreads, could be by the time I finish this video, right? As the war spreads, the time will come, and it won't be far from now, when Americans will go to the pump and say, holy sweet mother of God, what in the beat Jesus is this? $9 a gallon, 12, that 50, 20. Wait a minute. There's a sign on the gas station that says we don't have gas and we don't know when we'll have it again. What the hell am I? How am I going to get to work? How am I going to get anywhere? Let me stop by the grocery. Holy my God, look at the price of this stuff in the grocery store. Well, the trucks that deliver that stuff to the grocery store are paying $12 and $15 and $20 a gallon for gas when they can get it, or diesel fuel, right? So what we're looking at now is a time rapidly approaching wherein foreign policy will be so over the top, so absurd, that the American people will be able to directly connect it, that the American people will be able to look at the government and say, what you're doing in the Middle East right now, your policies are hurting my ass. Your policies right now. I woke up and all this crap's going on in the Middle East, and I woke up and now I can't afford gas. Nobody can afford gas. Nobody can afford anything. Our economy's shutting down. Things are going to pieces. We're about to fall into poverty. That time is coming, because if in fact this Middle East war spreads, if Iran strikes hard at Israel and the U.S. is back, and then this thing starts to spread, well, it's going to shut down the gas and oil coming out of there. Now let's get back to Venezuela. If in fact gas and oil, Qatar, a lot of gas comes out of Qatar. All of this stuff comes out of the through the Straits of Hormuz, Saudi Arabian oil, blah blah blah, etc. Right? If in fact there's a war, a lot of shipping companies will not insure ships that go into a war zone. So that's a problem. Furthermore, at that point, Iran, the Houthis, whoever, could further shut down more shipping lanes in the Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Hormuz, you name it, right? The Straits of Hormuz, etc., the Persian Gulf. All of that could go really, really bad, wherein the oil is interrupted, flow of oil is interrupted, and the price of oil goes through the roof overnight. And at that point, people wake up. Now, keep in mind, this is just before an election. So imagine that you have an incumbent party and they're making these decisions. And just before the election, just months before the election, people wake up and it's all over. The American experiment has flopped because, buddy, $15, $20 a gallon, that's it. Rationed gas, when people's lives are turned to hell. What happens to people that need gas to run their equipment? You got a lawn service, you got a whatever, boats that you are a netter or a shrimper or a crabber where you get seafood harvester, you name it. It takes energy to run. Now, what about the price of energy as far as oil and heating your homes and running these farm equipment? I mean, on and on and on. That's it, buddy. And what happens now? All of these businesses shut down. What happens to speculation? What happens to the energy speculation market? Then you got derivatives, and oh my God, the situation crumbles, and people wake up and say, "Holy crap! I've never put two and two together and thought, well, this what do you call it? This foreign policy is really going to affect me, but now I'm screwed." Well, the number one, it's over for the Biden administration. They're going to get destroyed. Israel does this thing spreads, which it seems now starting to be inevitable because look, the Israelis are mad dogs. Let's be honest. The leadership of Israel, they're mad dogs. They are not acting in any way that's rational. They are just fascist, violent, mad dogs, man. They're out of control. They're not acting in a way that is in the best interest of Israel. They're acting in the way that mad dogs act, completely irrational, thrashing in every, frothing at the mouth, thrashing in every direction. That's what we're looking at with Israel right now. That's the metaphor that I would use for Israel, a mad dog. Because if you've got an attack dog, you can control an attack dog. If you've got a mad dog, he's going to bite anybody that's near him, including you, right? A professionally trained dog will protect its master. It's a security. It can be like the equivalent of a security instrument. It can be trained very, very well when to attack on command, when not to attack, right? But a mad dog is just frosting at the mouth, and he just attacks anything anywhere near him, including you. And that's the perfect metaphor for Israel right now. And what happens if this gas and oil goes through the roof? Gee, let's see, who sells a lot of gas and oil? The US. So do you think ExxonMobil will be mad if it's $20 a gallon? No. You think the LNG people out of Texas, liquefied natural gas will be mad? No, they'll be making a fortune. The people will be furious, but the oligarchs who make money off of that won't be angry at all. Now, but let me add this. At that point, Venezuela becomes really important, doesn't it? At that point, Venezuela can, if they can, any oil that they can get out of there, they can sell. At that point, the Russias, the Irans, the Chinas, especially China, because China will need more oil because they can't get it out of there. They're going to say, look, we got to get them up and going. They'll put every dime they can in Venezuela to get Venezuela's oil market really, really going. And Venezuela can make a fortune. By the way, who's outside of the Middle East that sells gas and oil? Oh, yes, the Russian Federation. And at that point, they will have a license to print money. The amount of Russia will be able to make 10 years worth of profit in 6 months. Because let's face it, what happens if the price of oil goes up by 5, 6, 7 times, right? 4 times, 5, 6, 7 times. And the market, people are at their door begging for it. Russia, now, you know what Russia's going to do? They're going to sell it to their friends, India, China, what have you. If Europe comes to them, hey guys, can we possibly get some oil? Russia's going to say, yeah, we would, but those sanctions, we wouldn't want to burden you with violating our sanctions. So sorry, guys, have a nice day. Toodles. You probably should go get some more from the Middle East. Oh, wait a minute. Your policies have screwed that up, haven't you? Okay, well, it is what it is. Good thing you guys aren't going to have to get any of this filthy old Russian oil or gas because, somebody blew up your pipeline, cut them off going through Ukraine. So we don't have time to talk to you right now. We got customers we got to serve. Have a nice day. And we're still going to give them a reasonable price because they've been with us all along, right? So what you're looking at is an environment where the countries outside of the Middle East who serve customers for energy are going to make a fortune. And many of them ain't going to be thrilled about serving. I mean, come on, if you're Venezuela, do you really want to sell the US and Europe and these countries that were just trying to overthrow your government, that literally stole Citgo? If they say to Venezuela, hey, can we buy oil? Venezuela will be like, hey, tell you what, we got to sell it all to China. But here's what we'll do. Give us Citgo back. You stole Citgo from us. Give us back Citgo. Every dime, everything you stole. And then we'll consider talking to you, but not until we can't talk to you. Hello, can't hear you. Sorry, we got a bad connection. In the event that we get everything back that you stole from us from Citgo, you know, the connection might just go through and we might be able to talk to you. But if that doesn't happen, you know how these mobile phones are. I think this one got wet. See ya. Bye. Whammo. That's what we're looking at. I think that's what we're looking at. So, you know, sadly, unfortunately, I have a cousin who always says some people only learn through pain. And perhaps in the long run, it will save Americans from nuclear annihilation if they get kicked in the butt by the U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. The war spreads, which we certainly don't want to happen, but we know that potential is there, right? And the war spreads, and then of course, you know, the prices go up, the economy crashes, and we're left to live in the rubble. Basically, we're left to survive, to eke out of survival in the economic rubble, which won't be easy. So we'll see what happens there. Only got a few more minutes. I got to do something. 12. I got to do an interview with old Rick Sanchez. So let's move on. Lastly, is Ukraine. Hey, look, I don't have to worry about so much time. I'm currently demonetized by YouTube. So we will see whether or not I get undemonetized. Whatever the case may be, I ain't worrying about it. You know what I mean? I ain't going to starve. You know, I can keep a roof over my head, but I got to start thinking and looking about moving to other platforms and just using YouTube, you know, as a director. Just go on YouTube and say, hey guys, I'm going up on Rumble and I'm going up on Rockfin right now. So please, you know, come over there and support me, because you see what it is. YouTube wakes up and says, come on. Hey Garland, sorry, you're demonetized. Why? Because of this video. When I look at the video, 2 years old. We had to remove this video, 2 years old. Look, I showed everybody the video a couple weeks ago where I looked at my analytics because my numbers dropped like in half, at least 40%. And when I looked at my Google, at my YouTube analytics, it said the reasons. And the reason it had was you've got 40% less people coming through YouTube, your news to their YouTube feed, and like 38% less people coming through notifications. In other words, they out and out admitted that YouTube was taking actions that had just about knocked my my views in half. They admitted it. So I did a video called, you can look it up, and I said, caught red-handed. This is what they're doing. And I showed the analytics, and I'm like, they're showing it in their own analytics. I'm sure it was AI that put that up. Hey, Garland, you're down by 50%. Here's the reason why. Because we ain't sending the people there from the news feed, and we sure as hell ain't notifying anybody that you're on the air, right? That was what they said. The next day they changed it. And I did another video and showed it. Well, what do you know? Overnight it's changed. And now it says the reason that your views dropped in half is because you're not making videos that people want to see, right? And I'm like, okay. So things like that, we know what YouTube is. You know, those of us who push back against U.S. imperialism, you're sure as hell going to face the music on YouTube. All right, let's keep going. How much time? Got a few more minutes. So let's go to Ukraine, last but not least. Apparently, listen to Alexander Mercouris, there's some articles coming out. And there are people in the West who are now saying, well, you know, we know that Ukraine can't win. I'm paraphrasing. And that, you know, maybe another 8 or 9 months we'll have to negotiate. Well, two things. Number one, if you didn't know they couldn't win all along, you were deluding yourself, which is quite possible. Number two, if you think you got 8 or 9 months, you're deluding yourself, which is quite possible. And last but not least, if you think that you're going to be able to negotiate with Russia based on the lunacy that we get out of neocons, you're also deluding yourself. These people's idea of, you see some of their plans, hey, here's what we're going to do. We got a plan for negotiation. And it's brilliant. Can't possibly go wrong. Here's how it works. We go to Russia and we say, Russia, if you had lost the war, here are all the list of the demands that we would make from you with the unconditional surrender if you had lost. Granted, you won, but we're going to give you the same document and pretend that you lost. What do you think? That's a plan, right? It's an unconditional surrender. Okay, we cut that. We'll just mark the unconditional surrender part out, and we'll just leave in there, you give us everything we want. You're going to give the land back, the ground back. You're going to allow Ukraine to go into NATO, EU, you name it. Everything we want, here we go, here's our terms. And Russia's going to say, we gave you our terms in December of 2021. You can go back and look at them if you can find them. They're online. We can email you you read those. We did, nothing's changed. We gave you a list. What Russia's actually going to say is what they've been saying all along. This ain't just about Ukraine, guys. We know what the hell you're doing. You're trying to surround us with bases and take all of our stuff, and that ain't the only thing that'll do is get you nuked. If you want to get nuked, you're going in the right direction. Keep up the good work. If you would prefer not to get nuked, because that's the direction you're going, you have to read our requirements. We already gave you a list. Now, before we were willing to talk about it, now we have demonstrated that we have the wherewithal to stop you. So we don't really have to negotiate on the same level that we negotiated before. So now what we're then negotiating points are now demands. If you want us to stop kicking the hell out of Ukraine, then you can meet our demands. If you don't, it's up to you. What you going to do? Barbecue or mildew, as they used to say. What are you going to do? You gave us your demands and we said no. What are you going to do? Right? I saw this thing. There's a video going out with Mike Tyson, right? So apparently Mike Tyson is going to vote for Donald Trump, right? And somebody was investigating. And you know me, I don't care. You vote for whoever the hell you want to. Mickey Mouse, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris. Yeah, it's up to you, right? If somebody says I vote for Trump or Harris or whatever, it's your business. Vote for who you want to, right? I'm going to likely vote third party, right? I ain't vote for either of them clowns, but vote for who you want to. This business of getting on somebody because they don't do what you want them to do is crap. So Mike Tyson's talking to the guy, and he says, so Mike Tyson says, so I vote for Donald Trump. He says, so what? And the guy says, yeah, well, I could disagree with you. And Mike Tyson says, so what are you going to do? Beat me up? I don't think so, right? And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so either, right? Bottom line is this, so what? That was Tyson's position. I can do what I want. Vote for who I want. You don't like it, so what? What are you going to do? Right. And I think we're going to get to that point with Russia. The neocons are going to say, okay, we got a better plan then. We're willing to bend a little bit. You give us 99% of what we want, and then we'll call it even. The Russians going to say, look, we're going to finish what we're doing here. If you change your mind, call us. If not, so what? Make a decision what you're going to do, because we ain't changing. We're going to do what we got to do. If you want to be a part of it, it's going to require something. What it's going to require is a security agreement with Europe, between Russia and Europe. But you ain't going to do that. So what we're going to have to do is finish the job. That's what we're here to do. We got a list of things that we're going to accomplish, and we're going to accomplish. You want to make a deal, which the neocons can't make a deal. They are emotionally unable to make a deal. In order to make a deal, you got to be able to exercise strategic empathy. You got to be able to say, I think I understand. You got to say, let me listen to my adversary, see what they want, then I can work it, make a deal. Sociopaths don't have that capacity because they have never developed empathy. Tony Blinken, you think this guy has empathy? Look at that wrinkly suit wearing bastard. Anybody that wears a suit, if you got a suit, like, you're probably blind. You probably can't even look in the mirror and see his suit. It's wrinkled as hell. He looks like a homeless person most of the time. The homeless people actually dress far better than Tony Blinken. So whatever the case may be, I think we continue course and speed, and that ultimately the U.S. empire at the hands of the neocons are in the process of trashing our economy, wiping out our political system, and destroying the whole system. And it is what it is. Don't ask me. Look, I put it like this. Don't ask me to stand there with a stop sign. The system's terrible. Don't ask me to stand there. Oh, my God, we've got to save this horrible system. The system's got to go. The system's doing what it does. And what it's doing is committing suicide. All right, thanks a lot, guys. I got to run. I got a meeting with one.
Cool figure. Follow me.